Five Nights at Freddy's 4 has been released for more than 10 years now, which I know is crazy to think about, and with this game comes tons of mysteries that have remained unsolved to this day. And of course you could say that the biggest mystery from FNAF 4 is the box. A box that has been planned to open a couple of times but it never has, something the community can't agree on, and the mystery I want to discuss in this video. I've made a few theories on the box over the past few years, but now I want to make what I think is my best theory to this mystery and an answer that some of you might even agree with. And this would only be possible with the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 movie and the new lore that was just revealed. So my name is Bronze Films and let's attempt to solve the FNAF 4 box one last time. So for some quick context, after beating Night 7, fans were met with this ominous ending. The ending was just a lockbox with this text above it. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. This ending completely confused the fandom, with no one able to figure out what was inside or even understand the meaning of it. Scott Cawthon was going to open the box in the Halloween update, which included different animatronic designs and harder nights, but ultimately decided against it. In the game files, there is even a way to actually unlock the box by taking off the two locks as they fall to the ground, but nothing was inside. And this wouldn't be the last time the box was planned to be open, but I'll get back to these other moments soon. Scott instead released a statement on Steam with small clues. He decided not to open the box because no one was able to figure it out. For the first time in the franchise, no one was able to answer this mystery, and Scott Cawthon wanted to keep it that way. And from his statement, two things stuck out to fans, and now these two claims are the fundamentals for each theory. Scott claims that what's inside the box are the pieces put together, but would the community accept it that way? And in FNAF World, the box was planned to be opened one more time, as this sprite of the open box was found in the game files, and it's assumed that this would have occurred in the clock ending. Another important moment I'll get back to soon. And most recently, Scott Cawthon talked about the box in the Zaku interview, opening up the mystery of the box once more. Here he states how something was inside of the box, but he never pursued it story-wise, and he doesn't know if he can find it again. So the FNAF 4 box was planned to be opened 3 separate times, but yet we still never got an answer, and it's been left as an unsolved mystery. But what if this was wrong? What if we just got new information to this decade-old mystery through the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 movie? A little more than a week ago, we finally got the final trailer that revealed more about characters like Henry Emily, we got our first look at the withered animatronics like Withered Freddy, and we got a lore that fans have been using to solve parts of the game. We've gotten things like a backstory on William and blueprints to Freddy from the first FNAF movie. We also learned a lot about Vannesa and her nightmares. It's revealed that she's experiencing nightmares of a father, which could be a result of leaving him to die in the springlock suit at the end of the first film. We see her as a child running away from William in their home and hiding from him. These nightmares might also even include William wearing the Spring Bonnie suit, or these scenes are from flashbacks of the missing children incident. More importantly, we see Vannesa taking steps to enhance these nightmares or dreams just like how Mike did, by having white noise in the background and by having artifacts from the desired dream they would want to experience. Here, Vannesa turns on the static of the TV and places the following items next to her. Marbles, a journal. This one's harder to tell what it is, so it could be anything from a mirror to a ping pong paddle. But finally, she places this toy plane, the same toy plane that belonged to Garrett from the first movie. And it's what he carried when he was being kidnapped by William Afton. William even gave this toy plane to Vannesa, as we saw it in this photo. So it looks like this toy plane alongside the other items displayed are actually trophies that William collected from his victims. Of course, this plane belonged to Garrett, Mike's brother, and up to this point we know of a few other murders in the movie's continuity. We know of the missing children incident from the last movie, and now we got our first look at Charlie Emily, daughter of Henry Emily, who would be murdered by William and who would possess the puppet. William might also even be responsible for this boy's death that Charlie's carrying in this scene. Some have speculated that this could be Sammy, twin brother to Charlie in the Silver Eyes trilogy novels. Or it could just be any of William's other victims, and there could even be murders in this continuity that we're not aware of. So I think it's safe to say that all these items came from these victims, and that William would keep them as trophies until Vannesa would get a hold of them after his supposed death. But why even bring this up? Why does it even matter? Well, I want to point you to where these trophies came from. Zoom, enhance, that's right, it came from a box. Okay, I know by now you could probably just say I'm a crazy theorist for saying a box in any FNAF media and immediately connecting it to the FNAF 4 box. But hear me out, cause I swear it makes sense, and I think it's more than just connecting the boxes. If this is the movie version of the FNAF 4 box, and trust me I know that's a big if, what if the game's version of the FNAF 4 box also contained trophies from William's victims? Hear me out. With the game's continuity, I think we already saw something similar take place with the release of Secret of the Mimic. I'm sure by now you've seen tons of videos covering FNAF's latest installments to the franchise, with a lot of them focusing on FNAF's newest family, the Murrays. But if you haven't, here are a few to watch. For a very brief recap, here we learn that Edwin Murray, owner of Murray's Costume Manor, a contract who made Fazbear Entertainment ideas mechanically possible, had his company and life overtaken by William. William would steal his employees, would change their projects so Edwin would have to dedicate more time and money on them, and he might have even been responsible for the death of Fiona Murray, Edwin's wife. All in an effort to take over Edwin's life and company, and he is definitely successful. And not only does Fazbear's Entertainment legally take the entirety of Edwin's catalog for themselves, which is why we see new animatronics like Monty in Security Breach, as this character originally belonged to Edwin, and Fazbear or William even take over his land and home. When focusing on the building of MCM, taking a look at the outside of the manor and at the surrounding area, we find that the manor is surrounded by a forest, and to the side of the manor on top of a hillside we find this mansion. If this all looks familiar, that's because it's clearly the exact same location we've seen in other FNAF games showcasing where the FNAF 4 house resides. It's on the same hillside and surrounded by the exact same forest we saw in FNAF 4's loading screen where we saw the Afton family house for the very first time. And it's the same area as we saw in the Dreadbird DLC where we also saw the FNAF 4 house in, with it being surrounded by the exact same mountain and hills that just can't be a coincidence. But there's one major difference. This is not the same house as the Afton's house. Well, in the parachute ending, we saw the mansion being burnt down. So what if after the fire, William would save what was left of the mansion and remodel it to the FNAF 4 house we all know and remember? During the good ending, where Arnold is able to reset the Mimic's programming to mimic David Murray, son of Edwin, by playing him a bedtime story, we get a glimpse of David's room. And of course, this room is almost identical to the main room from FNAF 4 where all of the nights are played. They share a similar blue carpet, cabinets, and even patterns on the wall, and the closets where the Mimic and Foxy would come out of are almost identical, and most importantly, they both share the exact same toys. Toys that we've only ever seen in the FNAF 4 house that are once more returning in David's room. This just can't be a coincidence, and I think it's here to tell us that they are the same. So after the MCM fire, William would fix what's left of the mansion and would create it into a smaller house with the same toys and style of room. But before we can even connect all of this to the movies, we first would need to be able to explain how David was a victim of William Afton, which could honestly be possible. This is already an idea explored by theorists like the Unworthy Truth, where William would murder David by running him over in a Fazbear's Entertainment work van to further destroy Edwin's life. Check out the video here for the full context. So if this were the case like in the FNAF 1 movie, William is giving the toy of one of his victims to a child of his own, and here William might have even kept the toys as trophies and as a reminder of the Murray family. William from the movies and games both possibly kept trophies and gave them to their children, which all brings us back to the box. A popular theory called Neighborhood Kids MCI believes that the neighborhood kids in FNAF 4 that the crying child can interact with are the victims of the missing children incident. Although I don't know if I believe this 100%, I do think we can use it with this theory, as each neighborhood kid has something with him that could later become a trophy of William. This boy has a balloon, this boy who is most likely the Freddy bully has a Freddy mask, this girl has her toy animatronic toys, this boy has a Spring Bonnie plush, and this girl doesn't have anything on her but William still could have taken an item from her. So it's these things that were inside the FNAF 4 box, trophies from the neighborhood kids from the missing children incident. Another way to look at it that connects to my past theories on the box is through the masks. Shifting the focus, when looking at the intro from FNAF World, these mysterious eyes tell us they will put you back together, and we can safely assume these eyes are the same character as the Fredbear plush that belonged to the crying child. So I would argue that this text is referencing the box and the clues around it. Then in the end, the plush tells us the pieces are in place for you, the pieces which are referring to the mini-games from FNAF 3 in order to unlock the happiest day ending. Here the player is almost setting up the mini-games for the player in FNAF 3 to complete them, which will then set the souls free in happiest day. We see the player place 4 cupcakes onto squares, the same 4 the player in FNAF 3 collects and gives to children. We also see them placing Shadow Bonnie into a square, the same square or area we find Shadow Bonnie in this minigame. Without the player in FNAF World, the pieces wouldn't be in place for the FNAF 3 player to put them together. So if the minigames are the pieces, that's why many believe what's inside the box is the happiest day ending. In an update for FNAF World and in the source code it reads, he put the pieces back together, which is most likely referring to the player from FNAF 3 putting the memories back together, freeing the souls, which is only more proof that's what's inside the box. But because this isn't the focus here, a big part of happiest day are the masks that fall when their souls are free. These masks are clearly connected to these victims, which has led me to believe it's what they were wearing or had on them when they were murdered. Similar to how Garrett had his toy plane when he was kidnapped, the MCI victims would be wearing these masks when William murdered them. So if they had them on them at the time of their death, this would then allow William to take these masks or trophies, and as some of you are probably thinking right now, he would then take these masks and place them into the FNAF 4 box. I think there was a reason that it was masks that represented each soul instead of anything else, a reason that could later connect to FNAF 4 and this box. Especially now with the FNAF 2 movie trailer where we saw trophies in a box. Not only are these masks in a lot of FNAF games including the modern FNAF lore, but they would also connect William to the box and a purpose of him placing them there. For more evidence, when looking at FNAF Help Wanted 2 and at the Princess Quest ending, the player presumably collects memories from the missing children incident, which are in the form of plushies which are made with the masks of each of the victims. After collecting them all and after playing the Princess Quest arcade machine, these plushies now lie on graves, and the player has an option to light each grave, as after lighting them in a specific order, we find a memory of our own. In this secret room we find a chest, and when opening it, inside is a Bonnie mask with the text, "This looks familiar." It's been theorized that we play as Bonnie Bro in FNAF Help Wanted 2 from FNAF 4, and the reason it looks familiar is because it's the same one he wore the night the crying child was murdered. But after finding the mask, the player is able to free Vanessa from the control of Glitch Trap. If you haven't noticed yet, the events of this game almost directly parallel FNAF 3 and Happiest Day. The player collects memories and completes them, which leads them to finding a new memory or a memory of their own, which ends with an innocent soul or person being freed from the hands of William Afton or of his creation. So this could mean that the chest is a parallel to the box, meaning inside the box must also be a mask that is a memory, a mask that means something, or multiple masks from the MCI as I mentioned. But for the final pieces of supporting evidence and for the last way to look at it, how does this fit in with what Scott said and with other FNAF games? I actually do want to bring up the FNAF wiki, since at the time of writing this 5 hours ago, the same theory I'm talking about in this video was uploaded and labeled as Trophy Box. This is honestly something I feel like happens a lot with FNAF in the community, where theories come to the same conclusion or thought process, as I also saw it be brought up by this Reddit user, so I want to thank the people up on screen who had a part on writing this wiki theory and the Reddit post. So I want to bring up some points and evidence that they found. When looking at FNAF Ultimate Custom Night, we all know how Toy Chica represents William Afton and in a sense the missing children incident. Here we see Toy Chica collecting items from her murdered classmates inside of her backpack, which could be paralleling what was inside of the FNAF 4 box. Now, like the chest from Help Wanted 2, of course these two things aren't actually a box, but we could definitely see this as Toy Chica collecting trophies from her victims just like how William Afton did. But this can't be a FNAF video without mentioning Remnant, so with this theory it could be used to explain why William was even collecting trophies. It could be possible that each item contained Remnant that could later on be used for some experiments. Because the answer to what's inside the box is the pieces put together, using the Remnant from the personal items of the MCI victims could have been used to put together the crying child. And now the body of the crying child being inside is already a popular theory many believe in, or at least a lot of theorists in the community can agree that the box has something to do with the bite victim. So here after the MCI, William would hide the box with the trophies explaining the "some things are best left forgotten for now" quote, until he would figure out how the remnant from the items could be used to bring back the crying child. When looking back to what Scott said in the Dako interview, this quote would make a lot of sense with this box theory. Scott never explicitly said that the box was empty, he just said that this plot point wouldn't come back in any future games again. The box would never be opened because Scott wasn't able to figure out a way to implement these trophies into the story moving forward. With Sister Location and future FNAF games, this would also make sense. And don't get me wrong, the MCI still definitely did play a significant role, but at the same time the story explained new victims like Elizabeth Afton possessing Circus Baby, or a deeper explanation to how and why Charlie Emily was possessing the puppet in Pizzeria Simulator. Instead of focusing on how these trophies would affect the story or even characters moving forward, Scott would instead focus on expanding the story of the Aftons and creating a fitting conclusion for the franchise. Any character in any future game opening up the box filled with Purple Guy's trophies from his victims just simply wouldn't make sense story-wise, especially with what Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator focus on instead. But with that said, there are some issues with this theory, with the most important being the FNAF 2 movie. Now, there are a good amount of differences between the games and movies, which is why I think it's clear that the movies are in their own continuity separate from the games. So because the box would contain some item in the movies, it doesn't mean it contains the same items in the games. This is also just some box. We won't really know if it looks like the same one from the games until the movie comes out, and even then they could be saving the box for the FNAF 4 movie when the time comes. So with that said, remember this video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed. Comment down below any thoughts or theories, and what do you guys think? What is inside the FNAF 4 box, and will this mystery ever be solved? So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you all so much for watching. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach was released almost 4 years ago, which I know is just hard to believe since we still have tons of unsolved mysteries with this game. And one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries that I think will have a major role moving forward with the modern lore is the Blob. The Blob is a mystery that has dozens of different answers that all have their own evidence, and I've even tried to solve the Blob a few times on the channel. But one of the most popular theories in a channel that has had a huge role in trying to solve FNAF and Security Breach game theory in this infamous PNG that I'm sure you've seen everywhere. Matpat's interpretation of the Blob and of this really random part of Security Breach was one I really enjoyed and one of my favorite theories of his. So after watching Withered Circle's video on Miss Afton and looking back at Game Theory's interpretation, I thought why not do the same with the Blob? So in this video, let's look back at Game Theory's FNAF, the final Security Breach mystery solved, and if it really did solve the Blob. Does this theory still hold up years later after the game's release? Have we found any new evidence for this theory, and what does new lore and games tell us about this theory? Well, my name is Bronze Films, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and let's look at what is arguably the franchise's most confusing mystery. For some context, in FNAF Security Breach, Gregory goes to the lowest point in the pizzeria, which was revealed to be the location from FNAF 6. There he finds a sinkhole that goes to an even lower level where he finds the Blob, an amalgamation of animatronic parts, wires, and parts of characters we're all familiar with. The Blob tries to stop Gregory, but he is able to burntrap alongside the Blob and is able to escape the Pizzaplex with Glamrock Freddy. The Blob then reappears in a small cameo near the beginning of the Ruin DLC, where he can be seen inside of a hole in the wall before it quickly backs away and becomes out of view, as it will then disappear for the rest of the game. Down in the sinkhole, you can also find a trail of oil left behind from the Blob, as the trail leads to a hole in this wall. This can tell us that the Blob is within the Pizzaplex's walls and structure, meaning it's most likely the reason the Pizzaplex collapsed against itself was because the Blob would hollow out the foundation with massive tunnels, not because of an earthquake like the newspaper suggested. But what is this amalgamation of different animatronics? Well, it included the FNAF 1 versions of Chica and Bonnie, it included the puppet, Circus Baby, parts of Mangle, and at the head of it all is Funtime Freddy. Now before we look at game theories, some of the other most popular theories include that it's Molten Freddy from FNAF Pizzeria Simulator fused with scraps from the Pizzeria and Pizzaplex, creating a new amalgamation animatronic. But the issue here is that Molten Freddy was burned in the FNAF 6 fire, and that parts like the Funtime animatronics shouldn't technically exist, since by this point in the timeline they were already together as Molten Freddy, and parts from Circus Baby should have been Scrap Baby. Other theories are that it's made up of agony from murdered workers in the Pizzaplex, or that it's simply an entirely new antagonist that for some reason has beef with Burntrap. More recently, theorists like T-Dress have connected this mystery to Secret of the Mimic into the Storyteller tree, suggesting that the Blob is the game's version of Storyteller, or that the Blob is actually F10 and 4 engulfed in wires that are actually controlling and are all over the Pizzaplex, acting as a power source or a hub for the Mimic AI. And the masks could be explained by the FNAF 3 map found in the prototype pizzeria, as this prototype location would be where the Blob is currently residing in. Personally, I suggested that the Blob was made up of the souls of the 7 technicians from Secret of the Mimic who failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics and were killed by him. The 7 souls would line up with the 7 animatronics making up the Blob. But finally, looking at game theory's interpretation of this character that was released only months after this game was released, is that the Blob is made up of animatronic parts from Rockstar Row and the agony from the animatronics is fueling it. Now I recommend watching the full video if you haven't, or just to rewatch it, because it is always fun to look back at these theories before we had Ruin, Help Wanted 2, and even Secret of the Mimic to help us. And now Rockstar Row was featured in the opening of Security Breach, and it's a museum featuring all the new artifacts from the franchise. And on the surface, it may just seem like this museum only serves the purpose to hold fun Easter eggs or to show how much time has passed in the timeline. I'm sure many people, including myself, only look through the displays when playing for the very first time, but after that it's easy to just walk past it and completely ignore it. But these displays are important to the Blob, and most importantly, which ones are missing. So first, let's look at each display in Rockstar Row. Going in chronological order, we see FNAF 1 Freddy's foot and bow tie, Freddy's arm and ear, Freddy's mic and its stand, Chica's torso, foot and her infamous cupcake, Bonnie's guitar, and finally we see Foxy's torso and jaw. We then see various posters from FNAF 2 and FNAF 3. We also see these toys from the FNAF 4 bedroom, but we don't see any artifacts from FNAF Sister Location. In the corner we can find cardboard cutouts of Dreadbear, Ennard, Shadow Bonnie, Nightmare Balloon Boy, Circus Baby Plush, and Plushtrap. We also see this stage from FNAF Help Wanted, and it's supposed to be a replica of the first FNAF stage. But finally we see Glamrock Chica's old guitar, this film reel with the label movie on it, and we see this display with what looks like to be animatronic parts and one single eye. But like I said earlier, some of these displays have missing animatronic parts, which is why game theory proposed the idea that it's these missing parts that make up the masks and parts of the Blob, and so far it does make sense. We don't know exactly what items were missing, so it's not that hard to imagine that it was the heads, masks, and arms that the Blob would collect to create themselves. A lot of the displays are from the earlier locations, like the FNAF 1 Chica and Bonnie display, which could be exactly where the Blob would collect Chica's and Bonnie's heads and torsos. Or we see a lot of FNAF 2 memorabilia, which is where the Blob could get Mangle's parts and the puppet mask without the tears. Now it is harder to explain Funtime Freddy and Circus Baby since we don't really see a dedicated Sister Location display. But again, it's easy to say that it could have been any of these displays since we don't know what they look like with every item still there. And if these are just memorabilia and artifacts from past locations, this would explain why we see Funtime Freddy and Circus Baby instead of animatronics like Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy that they would become from Sister Location to Pizzeria Simulator. This would especially make sense since we saw those animatronics being burned down in the FNAF 6 fire alongside their souls being freed, which brings me to the next major point covered in this video. What's fueling the Blob if it's not these souls? Well, Matpat proposes the idea that because the original animatronics no longer have spirits powering them, the agony they felt while being murdered remains attached to the suits. That's why the Blob would even collect these parts from Rockstar Row, because they would be filled with agony that could then power the Blob. only making itself stronger with each part it collected. It's not collecting spirits, it's collecting agony.
All the pain and suffering of the children from over the years brought together to create one giant monster.
This would also explain why all the eyes for the animatronics and endoskeletons are glowing red. And it's also why the puppet and circus baby's eyes aren't glowing red. Like I said earlier, the puppet's mask is missing its tears, signifying that this animatronic's soul is freed, the same reason why circus baby's eyes aren't lit up. Elizabeth's soul was also freed during the FNAF 6 fire, and it's only their agony now fueling this monster. Now all of this 100% still holds up with what we know about the Blob and any new lore that was introduced, and the Blob being fueled by agony is still a popular theory, but where that agony came from is what can be different. But for some supporting evidence, which honestly isn't that much since they really did cover all bases, for practical reasons the Blob being able to grab these parts also makes complete sense. Game theory does cover these oily wires that we see all throughout the Afton boss battle, and even a segment from the story The New Kid from Fazbear Frights, where kids who are exploring an abandoned Freddy's location hear something slithering through the walls, which you could say is something that represents the Blob, a tangle of wires moving around the Pizzaplex. And I think we actually see these wires everywhere around the Pizzaplex, and I mean everywhere. Up on screen are only a few examples where these wires are just infestating rooms and areas of the Pizzaplex, and these wires do definitely look similar to the Blob's wires. So it looks like the core of the Blob is down in the sinkhole where we see the animatronics and endos, while his wires can stretch to and reach any area of the Pizzaplex. We can assume he can control these wires just like he does in the sinkhole when trying to grab Gregory. So if these wires are everywhere, then the Blob could have definitely just used one of these wires to sneakily take parts of Rockstar Row going undetected. So I also want to take a look at a duffel bag message that specifically mentions Rockstar Row. When taking a look at the stolen property message, it reads,
"Well, somehow someone broke into a Rockstar Row display case and stole the Wind-Up Music Man prototypes. The case was smashed and there's glass on the floor, but no sign of a break-in. Nothing else seems to be missing. I have absolutely no idea how they got into the building, and there's nothing on the security footage. Now what should I do? Should I call the police and report a break-in?"
Now I know we don't see the Wind-Up Music Man toys inside of the Blob, and this message could totally be about Vanny, but I think we can use it in the context of the Blob. The Blob would use one of its wires to break the glass of the display case and would then take an animatronic part. And the reason there's nothing on the security cameras is because they wouldn't be able to pick up a wire break in the display case, or maybe even because the Blob would use another wire to cover or disable the cameras. So the Blob taking parts from Rockstar Row makes that much more sense. In terms of the agony from these items even fueling the Blob and the evidence supporting this, I think it's just the fact that they're even missing. The game could have easily included every animatronic part in the display cases, and in that sense it wouldn't really have changed anything. But because some of them are missing, to me the game would want us to find them and to find a reason for them to be missing. These items having agony or even remnant from past tragedies is a perfect explanation to them being missing, as they could then be used to power or to give life to the Blob, or really to a dozen of different characters depending on how you see it. So as a whole, we have a pretty solid theory here. Now we just need to look at new games to see if it holds up, since this was released before Ruin and every project that followed. At the time this theory was released, we only had a teaser poster for Ruin, and from this, game theory theorized that the red eyes and wires seen on the poster would be the Blob returning once more as the main antagonist. They believe that the ruined Pizzaplex was a result of the burntrap ending where the Pizzaplex collapsed on itself due to the fire, and that because the Blob took burntrap with him, Afton and the agony of this animatronic would fuse together, creating an entirely new antagonist. And this was honestly something I feel like most of us believed in until Ruin was ultimately released. Alright, now the Mimic and the direction the Ruin DLC went towards wasn't really something any of us were expecting. But ultimately it was widely well received, and of course the Mimic has continued to be explored as the main antagonist with each new game's release, like a whole dedicated origin game, Secret of the Mimic. But that meant that game theory and really most of the community at the time weren't able to predict the Ruin DLC. For one, the burntrap ending wasn't even canon, as we learned that the Princess Quest ending was. We saw the princesses sort through the arcade machine in Vanny's room, and the other endings that weren't canon would receive a comic book style drawing that was made by Gregory to say they're not canon, which of course included the burntrap ending, and burntrap wasn't even in Ruin at all. Now you could argue that he's the Mimic or that he's somewhere else in the sinkhole, but without a definitive answer, he was just kinda pushed to the side. But what about the Blob? Well, game theory was right about the Blob. He does actually show up in Ruin, just for a slight second, and then we never see him again. Rockstar Row is also just something we don't really see, as this area is blocked off, so we can't really look here for evidence. But with the Blob itself, there are some interesting details worth mentioning. Earlier I said that all of the eyes from the animatronics in the Blob were glowing red, telling us that it's being fueled by agony. But here the Blob's eyes aren't glowing red any longer, and they don't actually have any glow to them. We don't see all of the animatronics that are supposed to be in the Blob since the player is only supposed to see the head, but we do see Bonnie and Circus Baby. Like in Security Breach, Circus Baby's eyes are still not lit up, but Bonnie's still are. Now I do want to say that it looks like the Blob no longer has any agony attached to it. Although we do see Bonnie's eyes lit up, this is most likely because they took the model from Security Breach and used what they needed, so Circus Baby and Bonnie look exactly how they did in Security Breach. But with Funtime Freddy, who again is the part the players were supposed to see, their eyes aren't lit up, and if we were supposed to see the full model, I'm sure all of the eyes of the animatronics would no longer be lit up. So what does this mean? Well, saying that Burntrap is Afton here, it makes sense that the agony fueling the Blob would be the strongest around the thing that inflicted the agony onto them. That's why they're trying to stop Burntrap, and that's why when they're close to him, all of their eyes are lit up. And in Ruin, with whatever happened to Burntrap, the Blob is no longer near him, nor would they have any agony towards him. It's also possible that the Blob would just want to escape the sinkhole after being stuck down there for some period of time. So after escaping, it would then lose its agony and would now roam the walls of the Pizzaplex. But if this is the case, then what's fueling it? Well, it could be anything from remnant or possession from souls we're not aware of. I personally think that it's just the remnant from these artifacts that is now fueling the Blob, but this just brings up yet another question. Now what? If Afton is defeated, what is the Blob's purpose? Without agony, what is the Blob? Well, this is harder to say, and unfortunately none of the games released after Ruin can even help. In FNAF Help Wanted 2, the Blob was supposed to make an appearance in the Fizzy Faz minigames, but it was ultimately cut, and we don't really know what they would have looked like. And of course, with Secret of the Mimic, although we can use pieces of this game's lore to fill in gaps of the Blob story, ultimately they're not concrete answers, and it doesn't really seem like we'll ever get one. Or at least that's what I would be saying if our last hope didn't lie with the next possible game, FNAF Abyss. I already made a video going over all the teasers and information for this next possible FNAF game that many are labeling as Abyss. It's believed that it will pick up right after the events of Ruin, with Cassie surviving the elevator fall and trying to get out of the Pizzaplex one last time. So if we're revisiting the Ruin Pizzaplex, then I think we can say for almost certain that the Blob has to make an appearance. We can assume that this will be one of the last games in the Mimic arc, or maybe even the last game centered around the Pizzaplex. We'll definitely see the Mimic, and maybe even Burntrap if he really is separate from the Mimic, so why wouldn't we see the Blob as a secondary antagonist? Or since he doesn't seem to be powered by agony anymore, he could be a friend to Cassie, helping her escape so he could also ultimately be free. I imagine a game mechanic where we can almost summon the Blob to move obstacles or to just help us find a way out. But this is all just speculation, and really it's our last chance to get more information on this character. But to end the video, I do want to look back at Game Theory's video and on what Matpat said about a solution to stop the Blob. He goes over how in the Fazbear Fright novels, the solution is to see in people's memories and to trap them in those memories. This might seem like it doesn't correlate with any of the games, but we have actually gotten a few tie-ins to memories. The best way to look at it is with FNAF Help Wanted 2, where you collect memory plushies of the missing children incident that allows you to complete the secret ending, where you then place these plushies onto graves, lighting them. And in Ruin, I also think we saw some sort of memory. In the sad ending where Cassie wears the Vanny mask in front of this Fredbear cardboard cutout, she sees Gregory, Helpy, and Vannesa happily on the infamous ending hillside as they all tell her they're safe. Now I know this isn't technically a memory as it's more of a false reality, but I think it could have been made from a memory where Cassie and Gregory were playing on a hillside, a memory that was one of Cassie's favorite that the Vanny mask would then recreate. And this is how I think they could stop the Blob if needed, by somehow trapping the Blob in a fake reality, never truly letting it escape. And this memory could be the way of telling us who the Blob really is and where the agony that's fueling it came from, but this is all just a theory.
A game theory! Thanks for watching.
With that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video where we look back at Game Theory's interpretation of the Blob to see if they truly did solve this character. So did they? Well, I think they did. I think they have one of the most solid interpretations that can still hold up to this day even with all the new lore revealed. So what do you guys think? Did Game Theory solve the Blob? Let me know if I should make more of these videos looking back at Game Theory's videos, as it was a lot of fun looking back at older interpretations, and you never know, 4 years from now we could be looking back at Tom's game theories to see if he solved the game like Secret of the Mimic. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you all so much for watching. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach was released on December 16th, 2021 and has been out for almost 4 years. I know, it's hard to believe. Not only is this game known for its complicated and mysterious lore, but it also introduced an entire new generation of fans to the FNAF franchise while also bringing in a new age of FNAF theorists. But 4 years later, what do we know about this game? Has the story evolved with new additions to the timeline? Have we answered every single mystery from this game? Well, in this retrospective video, join me as we go over the history of this game, every single mystery from the base game and from the Ruin DLC, alongside decide if these mysteries have been answered while also deciding what mysteries are still left from this game. Which all accumulates to answering one question: have we solved the Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach 4 years later? Well, my name is Bronze Films, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and let's get started. For an overview of the history of Security Breach, it really started with FNAF AR and Help Wanted. Special Delivery introduced us to emails between employees of Fazbear's Entertainment that included someone by the name Ness, and most emails were about a virus infiltrating company computer systems. Of course, we all know how this would pay off later, but most importantly, our first real teaser was at the end of the Help Wanted update. When walking outside this store, instead of following Glitch Trap, you would find the Pizzaplex under construction with a billboard from Fazbear's Entertainment right in front of it that read, "Now hiring." We would then get teaser images that included our first look at the Pizzaplex, the 4 main Glamrock animatronics, and even Vanny. We then got our first teaser trailer September 16, 2020, showcasing the Pizzaplex and the franchise's supposed new villain. We would then get 2 more trailers on January 12, 2021 and in February of 2021, before we'd get our final trailer on October 27th of that same year, revealing the release date and various aspects of gameplay. Finally, on December 16th, Security Breach was released, with its fair share of issues that I'm sure you've seen be discussed by now, but of course what people were also talking about was the lore. And to give you a history lesson on the lore of Security Breach, here's Neo Nobody.
FNAF Security Breach has a eventful history when it comes to theorizing about its lore. With this game came a brand new generation of FNAF fans, which also was a brand new generation of theorists, along with Matpat seemingly heading the way towards any general fans' basis of the lore. You also had newcomers Mr. Naff, and also Tall, Dark, and Toasty himself. But that aside, Security Breach took a while for the theorists to fully wrap their head around, because you had rooms that looked like this, combined with gameplay that looked like this. But eventually Matpat threw his hat into the ring with the Gregbot theory, the theory that Gregory is a robot version of the Crying Child. This theory, later shortened down to the nickname Gregbot, was very controversial and very memed upon in the community. A lot of people threw away actual evidence towards this theory just for the simple fact of, I don't like this idea, therefore it shouldn't be canon, therefore Matpat's wrong. But over time, people did begin to accept it, and nowadays in the FNAF lore, many new theorists are beginning to build off the framework of Matpat's original theory. But this wasn't game theory's only robotic revelation in Security Breach, as they also claimed that Vannesa could be a young adult robot version of Elizabeth Afton, in the same way that the Silver Eyes had a young adult Charlie bot, although this theory is overall less well known and less accepted than Gregbot. And to complete the Afton sibling trio, a lot of people quickly agreed that Glamrock Freddy was possessed by Michael Afton. And as if we didn't have yet enough weird Afton possessed souled shit up in here, then let's look down here instead in the Burntrap ending with William Afton once again being risen from the dead. And he apparently grew an arm. For a while, a lot of people assumed this was the canon ending, probably because it was the only ending to not end with a fucking comic strip. This upsetted a lot of people because it felt like at this point, fan service without any story importance. Why the fuck are we seeing this man get risen back from the dead? Like, we all get that's his thing, but come on, pal, your time's up, buddy. Luckily, later on, with the release of Ruin, we've all since concluded that Princess Quest is the most likely canonical ending, and it seems like we are finally putting Afton to rest and making way for our new main antagonist, the Mimic. Wait, so, Burntrap isn't William Afton? Is he just the Mimic? Don't worry about it. Nobody really knows. As 2022 continued, Scott released a brand new book series called Tales from the Pizzaplex. This was sort of the spiritual sequel series to Fazbear Frights, with both books seemingly paralleling, or at least giving clues and hints towards the game's lore. Scott has later gone on record to say that this book series was also to sort of course correct after the weird lore mistakes and mishaps that Security Breach brought to the community. And I love how Scott's version of course correction just involves baobab trees and fucking hallucinogenic gas. Scott, it's okay. You already introduced sound illusion discs. You don't need that. You don't. Tales from the Pizzaplex actually did wonders for the FNAF theorists, solving actually very controversial questions at the time, such as who is Patient 46. With this new information from the books, it seems like Gregory was also once under the control of Glitch Trap, and just like how he plays Princess Quest 2 free Vannesa, it seems like somebody must have played Balloon World to free Gregory. And this wasn't the only security breach revelation from the books, because in those same books we were also introduced to the man of the hour, the Mimic. The Mimic was an invention made by Edwin to take care of his son David Murray. At the time, a lot of people, including game theory, just assumed that Edwin was a parallel to Henry Emily's character. John FNAF proceeded to add on to this theory, thinking that maybe the Mimic's code is actually Glitchtrap's identity. And maybe, just maybe, we could trace the Mimic all the way back to this scene in Sister Location. This chip right here, possibly containing the Mimic's code. Everybody thought that these new revelation of theories practically solved Glitchtrap and his role in Security Breach. But everything changed when the Ruin attacked. The original teaser we had for the Ruin DLC showed the Pizzaplex in, well, a ruin, but it also showed off this almost ghostly looking girl, with the artwork's lighting making it seem like she has blonde hair. Everybody immediately assumed this was someone along the lines of like a ghost Susie, or like maybe a robot version of Elizabeth Afton. But in a surprising turn of events, it actually ended up being Cassie, the daughter of Bonnie Bully. And throughout the game, she is lured deeper and deeper into the Pizzaplex by the Mimic. I mean, Gregory, obviously. Can't you tell? It sounds like Gregory. It's Gregory, duh. Only to reveal when she goes down to the deepest depths of the ruined basement that it's just the Mimic all along. And yeah, this was the most obvious twist ever. Did Steelwool purposefully make this so fucking obvious? To escape the Mimic's clutches, Cassie goes up an elevator, only for Gregory to cut it, sending her all the way back down to the Mimic. But considering right once Cassie is going up the elevator, the Mimic is just sort of left standing there right next to the elevator's battery itself, it does seem like this is less likely to actually be Gregory and more or less the Mimic mimicking Gregory, possibly trying to set up Cassie for a future villain arc, making her the new and improved Vanny. We also had little hints towards future games in Ruin, such as Cassie's dad and his role in all of these whole Mimic shenanigans, along with some never before seen costume suits, which we now know were hinting towards Secret of the Mimic. However, seeing the Mimic in the flesh, or the metal, made a lot of people question the canonicity of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. But in terms of the history of the lore, that's pretty much it. But do these theories still hold up nowadays? Have we actually solved Security Breach? Well, let's ask Bronze Films to find out. Bye bye.
Thank you, Neo, and everyone make sure to check out his channel. So now that you basically know everything about Security Breach, now we can look at a list of mysteries that I think make up the majority of the game and whether or not we can solve them. I know this list can be debated, especially since there's so many smaller mysteries with this game, but to me these are at the core of the game and its story. So I'll do the same when we get to the Ruin portion of this video, a list of 10 different mysteries. So number 1, a mystery that is technically 3, who are these guys? The game centers around Gregory, Glamrock Freddy, and Vannesa or Vanny. This game clearly points importance to each of these characters in different ways, which comes with mysteries like possession, parallels, are they supposed to represent characters from the past, or are they literally the same people we knew of before? All things I'll discuss soon. Number 2 and 3 I'm grouping together. Who is Burntrap and the Blob? They both had major roles in the Burntrap ending and acted as new villains for the franchise that we honestly know nothing about. Each character has its own debate with the community, with Burntrap definitely being the one that fans can't agree on. Number 4, the Sticky Note Room. Now this has been theorized about ever since this game was first released for its odd and almost random nature. Even now it's hard to find a reasonable answer to who or what was down here writing dozens and dozens of messages on sticky notes. This room has heads of Nightmarian staff bots, and whoever was down here even made a staff bot recreation of the Afton family. I know, crazy right? Number 5, Princess Quest. Although these arcade machines seem pretty straightforward in every FNAF installment they're in, the main question lies with the princess herself and her true identity. Number 6, Patients 46 and 71. Although we have a good idea of who they actually are, what's confusing is what we learn about both of them and how it connects to the greater FNAF lore. Number 7, what role does the Afton family play if there's any? Now you can look at this mystery in a number of ways, like if they're actually alive, are we only seeing parallels to this family, or will they have a role in a future FNAF game? But mainly I want to look at if they're still here and especially where. Number 8, the Nightmare staff bots and plushies. Now this is arguably the most random and confusing part of this game, that we are still looking for an explanation, especially because they have continued to have a role in new FNAF games. So what are they? Are they important, and what does it all mean? Number 9, Sun and Moon. Now this was an entirely new animatronic introduced that the game pointed a lot of importance to, one we would even see reappear in multiple games. We saw a number of connections to other characters in animatronics, but why? Number 10, the endings. There are a total of 6 different endings to be unlocked, some animated while most of them are in a comic book art style. It was heavily debated which ending was canon, and even now it can be up to someone's interpretation. So now that we have our list of 10 mysteries, we can start to go one by one answering which one has been solved, which ones we have a really good idea about but can be debated, and lastly the ones we still know absolutely nothing about being unsolved. Alongside answering if each mystery has been solved, I also want to bring up videos from theorists that can be fundamental to helping our understanding of this game. So starting with the easiest ones that I think we can say have been solved by this point are the endings, Sun and Moon, and the Patience. Now for the longest time it was assumed that the Burntrap ending was canon because it was the only animated ending and it seemed to be directly connected to the Pizzeria Simulator ending, with William Afton coming back as Burntrap and the other animatronics returning in the form of the Blob. Then when Ruin was being teased, we saw the Ruin Pizzaplex, suggesting that the events of the ending where the Pizzaplex collapsed on itself during the fire were canon. It was believed that Gregory and Freddy were of course stuck down in the sinkhole because the elevator could only be used once, and some believe that these wires in the teaser belonged to the Blob and that he would be the main antagonist. But then, as Ruin was released, it made it clear which ending was canon in 2 different ways. The first is through comic book drawings Cassie finds that were drawn by Gregory. We find drawings of the 5 different endings, which is the game's way of telling us that these endings are not canon. And one of those drawings was about the Burntrap ending, specifically this moment as the Blob is about to grab Burntrap. Then before you reach the sinkhole, you find the princess's sword through the arcade machine with the image of the glitch out virus right behind it. This seemed to follow the events of the Princess Quest ending, with Gregory completing the arcade machines, freeing Vanessa while escaping with her and Glamrock Freddy's head. Although it still can be argued which ending is canon, especially with some arguing Burntrap has still had a role as the Mimic and that the Pizzaplex could have only collapsed on itself after the fire. As of now, Ruin seemed to have confirmed through drawings and Easter eggs that the Princess Quest ending is canon, officially solving the first mystery. Now looking at Sun and Moon, like I said, this character seemed to be important, but it was hard to say exactly why. In Ruin, Eclipse even had the same teeth as the Mimic, which made a lot think that he came from the same time period as the Mimic and that they were closely related. So when FNAF Secret of the Mimic was released this past June, it proved exactly that. Here we learn that Edwin Murray, owner of Murray's Costume Manor, a contractor who made Fazbear's entertainment ideas mechanically possible, was responsible for creating the characters Sun and Moon. There is even a Moon mascot section of the game that has its own mysteries. We even got more lore with Edwin being a parallel to Moon in the Moon.exe minigame. And that is why Fiona represents the sun, with her icon even showing up above F10 N4 or M1, which was designed to mimic her. If you even want to break it down by smaller mysteries in Security Breach, this game even explains why other random animatronics show up, like Monty, Roxy, and DJ Music Man. They were all originally created by Edwin Murray, but were repurposed decades later by Fazbear's Entertainment because they legally got a hold of Edwin's wide catalog, when his company ultimately failed. So although I think more can be said about Sun and Moon and that we'll continue to learn about them, their backstory and meaning alongside existence of other characters has definitely been solved. When looking at the final solved mystery, this one's pretty straightforward but also pretty controversial, the patient CDs. Through CD collectibles, we learn about 2 patients seeing therapists with their sessions being recorded, patients 46 and 71. Patient 71 is clearly Vanessa, as the game explicitly tells us that. We learn about how she is basically being taken over by the glitch trap virus and that multiple therapists are seemingly disappearing. With patient 46, their identity is hidden, but we do have certain facts to help us identify who they are. We know they have hacking abilities, are most likely a child, and have a close connection to the Pizzaplex. And of course, the person who comes into your mind may be Gregory. Now, there are other theories to who this could be that include, but are not limited to, Charlie, Elizabeth, and even the crying child. Oh, and most of these theories revolve around robot children, which is something I'll mention later. But then, with the tales from the Pizzaplex novels, we learn about GGY, who has the same hacking skills and is closely connected to the Pizzaplex, who is probably but most definitely Gregory. This seems to point us back to patient 46, the exact same traits, and the novels just give us more context to this character who can be seen as the antagonist. Now, before you go commenting that the books aren't canon, don't worry, I know, and it's something I strongly believe in. But I still think we can use them as supporting evidence to back up claims, especially when these books have strong connections to characters from the games and it takes place in the exact same setting as Security Breach, but again, not canon. So we know who both patients are, and whenever we have theories about Vanessa or Gregory, the consensus is that the CDs can be used as evidence to learn more about their characters. And now we can look at the next set of mysteries that I'm going to label kinda solved, as a lot can be debated within them. Starting with my favorites, who are Burntrap and the Blob? Now these are mysteries I made a ton of videos on, and you've most likely seen them being discussed by amazing theorists. With Burntrap, the main argument is whether he's William Afton coming back once more, or if he is the Mimic, mimicking William Afton while wearing a corpse and springlock suit. The evidence towards him being William are pretty straightforward. Burntrap shares a similar design to all of William's appearances, and a decaying corpse within a spring bunny suit. You can see his flesh like Springtrap or Scraptrap, Burntrap has purple eyes with purple smoke coming out of his charging station that is presumably keeping him alive. Burntrap is found in the sinkhole in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, which is of course the same location where Pizzeria Simulator took place, where William was burned and supposedly killed. This also means that Glitchtrap is William as well, with his agony or spirit possessing a circuit board, where he would infect the Help Wanted game and Vannesa. Vanny would then bring him physically back as Burntrap. With the argument of him being the Mimic, most of it lies with the novels, Ruin, and even with Secret of the Mimic. The Mimic shares physical features with Burntrap. When looking at their legs, they both don't match, both their left feet only have 3 toes, both of their left arms have 5 fingers, and they both have a similar pose with their left arm is raised but their wrists are flat. In the books, we learn that the Mimic wears a mascot suit with a person already inside of it, causing the person's flesh to fuse with the Mimic and for the mascot suit left over on the endoskeleton. When you picture it, this is exactly how Burntrap would look. The flesh is from the person and the suit would have come from the mascot the person was wearing. In Ruin, it would also explain why Burntrap is notably missing, as we know the Mimic was designed to mimic others. And a video I want to highlight by underscore how Ruin secretly solved the Burntrap debate, which I'm sure you've all seen by now, and if you haven't, please do, because it's honestly just amazing. But it highlights how a claw mark that is found in the vent next to Burntrap's room is also found in the vent leading to the Mimic's lair. This claw mark also perfectly lines up with Burntrap's hand, suggesting it's the same hand as the Mimic and that he was the one who left it here in both locations. We even find a similar purple glow effect in the Mimic's room, just like we do when Burntrap is revealed. So after Security Breach, Burntrap would crawl through this vent, would lose his corpse and springlock suit, and would then be trapped in this room by Vannesa and Gregory, where he would leave another claw mark, again making these two the same. So when looking at all the evidence, it can truthfully go either way, and I'm sure many of you watching this video are still split on the topic. It's just one of those things that still hasn't been answered, and I don't think it will unless we get new information with a new FNAF game. But we do have solid evidence for both sides that doesn't leave this mystery completely unsolved. Now with the Blob, there's much more possibilities than just 2 sides. Some of the most popular theories include that it's Molten Freddy from FNAF Pizzeria Simulator fused with scraps from the Pizzeria and Pizzaplex, creating a new amalgamation animatronic. But the issue here is that Molten Freddy was burned in that fire, and that parts like the Funtime animatronic shouldn't technically exist, since by this point in the timeline they were already together as Molten Freddy, and parts from Circus Baby should have been Scrap Baby. Another popular one from Game Theory that was released only months after the game was released is that the Blob is made up of animatronic parts from Rockstar Row, and the agony from the Pizzaplex is fueling it, which is why the puppet is missing her tears and why we see Funtime animatronics when they should be parts from Molten Freddy. Other theories are that it's made up from agony from murdered employees in the Pizzaplex, or that it's even an entirely new antagonist. More recently, theorists like T-Dreads have connected the mystery to Secret of the Mimic into the Storyteller tree, suggesting that the Blob is the game's version of Storyteller, or that the Blob is actually Afton and 4 engulfing wires that are actually controlling and are all over the Pizzaplex, acting as a power source or a hub for the Mimic AI. The animatronic parts could be explained by the FNAF 3 map found in the prototype Pizzeria, as this prototype location would be where the Blob is currently residing in. So if this map was here to tell us that we were near this prototype location, the Blob could have easily gone there and gone masks of different animatronics. Personally, I suggested that the Blob was made up of the souls of the 7 technicians from Secret of the Mimic who failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics and were killed by him. The 7 souls would line up with the 7 animatronics making up the Blob. But like with Burntrap, it's just one of those things where we have no concrete information and it could honestly go either way. Even in Ruin, when the Blob showed up again, it was only for a slight second and it didn't tell us anything about the character itself. But because we have some ideas, Burntrap and the Blob are kinda solved. Now the Nightmare Staff Bots is a mystery I'm sure you've also seen be discussed by now, a strange recurrence of a character that wasn't even supposed to be canon. We saw him in a Help Wanted level, officially making him canon to the universe, also meaning Fazbear's Entertainment knew of his existence. We would continue to see Nightmarian in Security Breach through the Nightmare Staff Bots with the message "in your dreams." This was accompanied by Nightmare plushies hidden around the Pizzaplex almost as if they were watching us, and we would continue to see them in Ruin, but why? Well, now most of the theories revolve around the Mimic, and more specifically how they could be representing each other. An amazing video I want to highlight, which is actually a new one, of FNAF The Ultimate Nightmarian Theory by FNAF. Here he goes over how Help Wanted was being mimicked into the Pizzaplex by the Mimic program, which includes the Nightmarian staff bots, as it would have been mimicked from Nightmarian from one of the minigames. He brings up a lot of great connections to the Silver Eye book trilogy into the games through parallels, and he suggests that Nightmarian represents the Mimic itself. Through scrap content and Secret of the Mimic, we learned how all of the mascot jump scares were supposed to include a Nightmarian's jump scare sound effect, not just Jackie. He also brings up how the placement of Nightmarian staff bot heads in the sticky note room would represent the physical Mimic, and that the server room filled with puppet-inspired wires would represent the virtual mimic virus. So I think it's clear that Nightmarian is connected to the mimic and to the mimic's origins, but it's still something where the meaning can be seen as vague and we still don't have all the pieces to this mystery. But for the last kind of solved mystery, what's up with the Aftons in the Pizzaplex? Like I said earlier, you can tackle this mystery in a number of ways, with the first simply being parallels. Burntrap or the mimic represents William, Glamrock Freddy represents Michael, Gregory represents the crying child, and Elizabeth represents Vanessa. Or you could take this literally, with William coming back again, Michael possessing Glamrock Freddy after the FNAF 6 fire.
I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path.
The crying child would return as Gregory in a sort of robot child situation, which I'll come back to later. And Vanessa would also either be a robot or it's actually Elizabeth returning in some way. Or it's a mix, where some return and some don't, where people like Michael Afton could still be alive working for the new Fazbear's Entertainment, while Vanessa's actually a new Afton we never heard of until now. Each possibility has its own set of evidence, with the two people who come to mind who really explore the possibilities being Game Theory and ID's Fantasy. Of course, Game Theory brought up Miss Afton and a role in trying to bring back the Afton family, while ID's Fantasy had a couple theories on different members. And even most recently, she revisited Glamrock Freddy and Michael in this video. But one of the main issues is that with each new addition to the franchise, it seems to stray away from the Afton family. Ruin introduced the Mimic, which kinda eliminated William from the picture. Help Wanted to continue to dive into Glitchtrap, where at this point the consensus is that he is the Mimic. And of course we got Secret of the Mimic, a whole game dedicated to the Mimic and a new family, the Murrays. But at the same time, the Aftons are still very much present. In Secret of the Mimic, we got emails from WA or William. We basically got confirmation that Edwin's mansion later becomes William's home, as David's room is almost an exact copy to the crying child's room. And it seems that Michael might have a role in the next FNAF game, which might have Abyss in its title. I made a whole video going over the teasers leading up to this game and a new hour-long ambience video released by Stewwool. During this video, slightly altered tracks from Sister Location played, which included Demolition Inevitable, Michael's infamous theme. This could suggest that Sister Location and Michael will have some role, with fans theorizing that Cassie survived the elevator fall at the end of Ruin and that the elevator fell into the Sister Location bunker, where Cassie will have to navigate her way through Circus Baby's entertainment and rental just like Michael did. And if he is really alive, he could show up and help her out, as in Ruin, Gregory does mention some mysterious friend before their name is cut off.
My friend has access to the building maps. Just follow the instructions.
But now I'm just rambling, and it could just be as possible that he died in the FNAF 6 fire. So this just leads us right back to the beginning. Yes, it's clear the Aftons have had some role in Security Breach, but this could mean anything. Which leaves us with dozens of theories surrounding this family's fate. And now looking at mysteries that I would consider unsolved, let's start with the princess. The Princess Quest arcade machines have had a role ever since Help Wanted and have continued to have a role all the way until Help Wanted 2. It's clear Princess Quest was one of the ways to defeat the Glitchtrap virus and to more specifically free whoever was under his control, where in this case it was Vanessa, but the actual identity of the princess has remained a mystery. This really cool video by Rightos, who needs no introduction, explains the possibility of the princess being Cassidy or Golden Freddy. Originally, the game's files included the name Cassidy for the princess sprite, which immediately made people say that the princess was Cassidy. Rightos also draws connections to Cassidy possibly being represented in the Tales from the Pizzaplex novels as a parallel to the story Drowning. And the fact that Golden Freddy is in every single game where William is made it weird that they wouldn't appear in Security Breach, where William clearly is. Other theories suggest that the princess could be anyone from Vanessa, Charlie Emily, and Cassie from Ruin. Although we have theories on who the character is, the story seems to focus on the arcade machines themselves and how they're connected to Glitchtrap or Vanessa. So no clear intention to explore this character further leaves this mystery unsolved. Now looking at the sticky note room, which like many theories is still being debated to this day. Probably the more confusing part of this game, the simple question is who was in this room? A great example of a theory that really acted as a sort of pillar to other theories is Game Theory's FNAF the clue that almost solved everything. This video builds off his Gregbot theory, which don't worry we're about to cover, where Gregory is the crying child reborn as a robot. As the sticky notes tell us a story about the crying child coming into consciousness and remembering his past, like his birthday party or the bite, which is why we see the Afton family staff bots as it's him trying to recreate the family he lost. Most theories from here honestly are about robot children or the idea of something gaining consciousness. A lot of new theories suggest that it's actually the Mimic, and the sticky notes are about his past with the Murray family or him trying to mimic the Aftons' lives. Even more now when we have the Mimic mimicking David as a child, which lines up with the childish drawings and notes in the room. But we still don't have concrete evidence to who this is or what this room really represents, and I don't really ever think we'll get a concrete answer. Finally looking at what I call the big three, who are Gregory, Glamrock Freddy, and Vanessa? Cause yes, this mystery is different from the Aftons. I briefly talked about Vanessa being Elizabeth Afton, a new Afton, or an entirely new character. The similarities between Elizabeth and Vanessa can't be a coincidence, and it could be the reason Glitchtrap chose to take over her life. We learn a lot about her character through the CDs, but still her identity remains a mystery. She clearly knows more about the Pizzaplex and Fazbear's than we've realized, because her, alongside Gregory, trapped the Mimic in this room and must have known about him previously and just how dangerous he really is. She might also know more about Mexis, as she either reactivated this machine to keep the Mimic trapped, or as some believe, she's the one who moved it here. She also has a connection to the Princess Quest minigames, which can be interpreted in a dozen of ways. It would be weird for Steelwood to introduce a character that clearly has narrative and visual similarities to past games and characters, only for them to actually be someone entirely new. But even then, without a clear idea for the community to theorize and build off of, her character has remained as someone we know is important, but unclear to where the franchise is going to take her and why. Now, Glamrock Freddy is a character with even more possibilities to who they are, and I think it's the one the community can't really agree on. A few ideas include possession by Michael Afton, Henry Emily, Charlie Emily, or even the Crying Child, which is an idea I honestly lean towards. Michael and Henry were both down in the FNAF 6 fire, and either of the souls could have wandered off into Freddy. While with the Crying Child and Charlie, it can be argued that their personalities are very similar to Freddy. Charlie would act as a protector as the puppet to the other souls, just like Freddy acts as a protector to Gregory, stopping him from being a victim to Vanny like the many others. On the other hand, it can be seen that Freddy is scared, just like the Crying Child is in FNAF 4. He's almost scared of Vanessa the same way the Crying Child was of the animatronics and with his older brother Michael. He is also missing his head in Ruin, which could be a parallel to CC losing his head in the bite. Ruin Freddy also resembles Nightmare Fredbear, which is another way CC is represented. But if none of these souls are possessing Freddy, it could simply be that his AI is different from the others. In Help Wanted 2, we learn that the Glamrock Endos were trained in the same room where Glamrock Freddy was trained and essentially raised. So maybe here his AI was trained with the information of any of the actions or with different tragedies from the past. Which is why his personality seems similar to characters we've known of before. There are also newer theories on Glamrock Freddy like this one by Minibyte Games connecting Freddy to F10 and 4. However, these are still just theories and the games don't seem to lean towards any definitive conclusion. But it does seem that Glamrock Freddy will return and maybe we'll finally get an answer to his identity. Finally, let's look at Gregory, where this single image from game theory revolutionized theorizing and ideas about this franchise. I'd say the biggest theory around Gregory is of course him being a robot child and actually being the Crying Child, an idea brought up in Game Theory's video, FNAF Don't Trust Gregory. Matpat brings up points how Gregory doesn't have a guest profile and how he's most likely living in the Pizzaplex, how he stutters when Freddy asks his name, his physical appearance that resembles Crying Child, Freddy's comment on how Gregory is broken, instances in the books where children are rebuilt into robots, and how Gregory's vision almost glitches out when Vanny gets near him, since her presence would be disrupting the feed of his robot eyes. This idea has even been further explored in a new theory by T-Dreads, which I'm sure you've all heard about by now, where T-Dreads proposes that David Murray from Secret of the Mimic, Gregory from Security Breach, and the Crying Child from FNAF 4 are all literally and narratively connected. He highlights connections between David Murray and Gregory, like how both are seen sitting on the same hill at the future Pizzaplex land, connections between David Murray and the Crying Child, like how they both have neglectful parents and have the same house and toys. This all leads to the idea that William Afton is trying to recreate David into the Crying Child, attempting to copy Edwin Murray's invention. Of course, I recommend checking out the full, almost hour-long video to get the full context. So based on these theories, I would actually label Gregory as being kinda solved, but as a whole, being connected to the other two major characters from Security Breach, finding an answer for all of them seems somewhat impossible, or at least not yet. That leaves us with 3 mysteries solved, 4 mysteries kinda solved, and 3 more mysteries unsolved, and we haven't even gotten to Ruin yet. Now, I did talk about the Ruin DLC a lot, but this is definitely its own project with its own set of mysteries that we need to dissect. So, to give you a brief history on Ruin, let me introduce a good friend, Unnamed Security Guard.
Hey everybody, I'm Unnamed Security Guard, a new FNAF theorist and former security guard, and Bronze has asked me if I would be willing to do the Ruin section of this video, and as you can see, I am more than happy to. So, without any more ado, let's get right into it. So, to give the briefest of overviews, Ruin opens with a girl named Cassie as she jumps down into the ruins, of the Pizzaplex. She pauses to call out for Gregory, saying she got his message, but after getting no response, she continues down into the main lobby, next to Rockstar Row, and deeper into the Pizzaplex. As she is walking in, she hears a static noise in the distance by the elevators and starts to go towards it. When she gets there, she finds a Roxy talkie with Gregory on the other end, saying he is trapped in a sinkhole under Roxy Raceway and she needs to come find him. As she continues, she finds a Fazwatch, much like her dad's, and uses it to open doors and deactivate the security nodes of the Mexis system after being told by Gregory that for him to escape, all of the security nodes need to be deactivated throughout the ruined Pizzaplex. Near the end of the DLC, she makes her way into the sinkhole and under the ruins of the FNAF 6 pizzeria where, after completely deactivating Mexis and breaking through a concrete wall with a forklift, she climbs through, and the game reveals the voice throughout the DLC wasn't Gregory at all, but a new character called the Mimic, who moves to attack Cassie before Roxy pushes the Mimic away, buying time for Cassie to run away. This is where the game branches off into its 3 different endings. One of the endings, which appears to be the canon ending, is the main ending you get by successfully escaping the Mimic and making it to the elevator. After barely escaping the Mimic, the real Gregory explains how she was never supposed to go down there, how the thing in the sinkhole tricked her, and has been trapped down there, quote, a really long time. After saying how it isn't her fault the Mimic is free now, and knows she did it for him, before saying, quote, we can't risk being followed, he apologizes before the elevator falls in a complete freefall a moment later. After a long moment of silence, we hear Roxy say, Cassie, before the game ends. In what has been dubbed the Brazil ending, if you ignore Gregory's directions and take the wrong path during the Mimic chase at a particular junction, you will find a dead end with a Freddy cutout holding ice cream. If you put on the mask at the cutout before the Mimic gets to you, you see an image of Vannesa, Gregory, and Helpy on a hill, enjoying ice cream as music plays. Gregory says it's okay, and he found a spot to hide as a distorted voice of Gregory can be heard overlapping, and as Cassie's breathing becomes more and more panicked. It ends with a distorted voice of Gregory saying, keep going. The final and secret ending has been dubbed the Scooper ending. To get this ending, you need to find secret cameras at chapters 1, 3, 5, and 7, and look through them until a secret door opens in the video feed. When all 4 secret doors have been opened, you continue playing the game normally until the Mimic chase at the end. When you get to the final hallway that the elevator is at the end of, to the left will be a new path that is opened, and at the end of this new path, you will find a room with a button that activates a scooper that is in the main room that grabs the Mimic as it begins banging on the door. It pulls the Mimic into the smoke, and once it clears, the Mimic is laying on the ground, seemingly deactivated, and the game ends. So, that pretty much covers Ruin, so thank you guys for watching, and thank you Bronze for having me on.
Thank you so much, Unnamed Security Guard, and everyone please make sure to go check out his channel. So now we can look at the list of Ruin mysteries, which is a lot shorter, and go through the exact same process where most of these theories are going to revolve around the Mimic. Number 1 is the Mimic glitch trap. Now at this point you would imagine that glitch trap would finally be solved and that the answer would be revealed through the Mimic. Although there are connections, I want to look at all the possibilities and how it ultimately does matter to solving parts of Security Breach. Number 2 are the books canon. Now I think this is 100% the most controversial topic with the modern FNAF lore, and it's one that's been developing as the books and games have been released together. Are the books in a different continuity? Are they parallels or are they canon? I think the answer is clear now, so when I get there, please be nice in the comments. Number 3, which ending is canon? Like Security Breach, there's a couple of endings with each of them having some argument to being the canon one. Although we don't have the next game in the timeline to tell us which one was canon like Ruin did with Security Breach, I think we already got an answer. Number 4, what is this thing? Of course you may see the scooper and think immediately of the scooper from FNAF Sister Location, making these two the same and these two areas the same. Or it could honestly be something entirely new created by Fazbear's Entertainment, so we'll find out soon. Number 5, what is Mexis? Another part of Ruin that really confused the FNAF community was this simple supercomputer. Is it possessed by someone we used to know, or is it just a new character? Obviously this is someone important and we might just be one step closer to solving who this is. So actually starting with the opposite from the Security Breach list, what mysteries are unsolved? Well, in my opinion, simply none of them, because Ruin was a continuation, because we now have 2 projects released after it, and most importantly, because Scott Cawthon and Stu will work together on this game making one coherent story, something I'll discuss later, we now have a really good idea of what Ruin was supposed to tell us, leaving only solved and kinda solved mysteries, starting with our first solve a mystery, which ending is canon. To find an answer, we need to look at teasers that we've gotten over the past few weeks to what looks like to be Ruin 2. One of the main composers responsible for the incredible FNAF music, Leon Riskin, posted this teaser for an upcoming project named Forgotten Names and Faces, with the tags reading, "Who will catch you when you fall into the abyss?" This included brand new music, so take a listen. If it sounded familiar, that's because it has the same melody from Gracefully Into the Abyss from FNAF Help Wanted 2. It appears that this new project is an upcoming FNAF game in the franchise. The acronym for Forgotten Names and Faces spells out FNAF, and both songs seem to be centered around Princess Quest with the word Abyss in both of them. This has led many to title this new game FNAF Abyss or FNAF Into the Abyss. He also posted a song titled Fixing Elevators with the caption, "Elevators can't be trusted, take the stairs." The hashtags in the post also spell out Betty Lou Oliver, a person who holds the world record for surviving the longest elevator fall. All of this just screams Cassie and her fate at the end of the Ruin DLC. She tries to take the elevator to escape the Mimic, but either the Mimic or Gregory cuts the elevator, making her fall to her supposed death. But with these teasers, it suggests that she actually survived and that the next game will be FNAF Ruin 2, meaning Cassie is still down in the sinkhole alone with the Mimic and that the elevator ending is the canon one. Sure, this could change as we get more information and teasers, but so far it's heavily suggested that the bad ending is canon, meaning the sad ending where Cassie wears the Vanny mask in front of the Fredbear cardboard cutout revealing Helpy, Vannesa, and Gregory happily on the hillside, alongside the Scooper ending where the Mimic is scooped out of the lion costume, are not canon. The next solved mystery is the book's canonicity. Again, I can't reiterate how insane it was being in the community at the peak of this argument. You had both sides willing to put everything on the line to prove that the books were or weren't canon, specifically the tales from the Pizzaplex novels. There are a total of 8 different novels with tons of stories that have helped us to piece together the timeline, like with Didophobia that finally told us more about FNAF 4 and Sister Location. And of course, other stories like GGY really made some consider the possibility of the books being in the same continuity as the games, as Gregory would be GGY. We were seeing more and more connections between the two, with what really made the topic so controversial being the Mimic's appearance in Ruin. This was of course a major antagonist in the books, so finally seeing them in the games made it seem like this argument was over. But of course you could have said that this was just a parallel, and this was even something I believed in. But then with the FNAF Help Wanted 2 update released in December of last year, it really seemed over for the book deniers, as not only did we see the Mimic, but we saw the Tiger Rock plushie for the first time in the games. This tiger plushie belonged to David Murray from the books, as the Mimic would even get a plushie of his own. Up to this point we only knew of the plushie and the Tiger Rock animatronics from the books, but now this was a major character that existed inside of the games, confirming the Mimic's backstory and that he wasn't just a parallel. I even made a video about this update saying that we could no longer deny the book's canonicity. In the update we even saw what seemed to be Edwin Murray's company and the factory from the books. So the final nail in the coffin was Edwin Murray himself being mentioned in the Secret of the Mimic trailer released in February of this year. At this point it was undeniable that the Mimic and Edwin were canon characters and not just parallels to characters like Henry. And as we'd get more teasers or images for this game, a large part of the community could finally agree that the books, or at least part of the books, were canon. So finally, this debate was put to a rest.
It is lonely down here.
Wait, what? What are you? A computer?
Okay, you know what, never mind, I am doing a 180 on what I just said. The books are definitely not canon whatsoever, right? Although the main points from the books did transfer over to the games, like the Murrays and the Mimic's backstory, what didn't were the specifics of the story and how it impacted this game alongside the rest of the lore. There are a couple of things that were just different, but a perfect example is Fiona, wife of Edwin Murray and co-owner of Murray's Costume Manor. In the book, she dies giving birth to David and doesn't have a role in his life. But here Fiona was very much alive for the first couple of years in his life, and it's implied she died at a Fall Fest fire. And her absence in David's life is why Edwin created the Mimic and M1, a program designed to mimic Fiona. M1 is then transferred into the supercomputer F10 and 4, which may or may not be Mex's, something we'll discuss soon. And even now it's theorized that F10N4 still has a role in the modern lore as I discussed earlier. So honestly, this detail alone should be enough to say that the books in their entirety are not canon to the games. Sure, you could argue that parts of the books are canon, but with how Secret of the Mimic structured the Murray family, which did differ from the books, I do think it's safe to say that the books are not canon, solving this mystery. Now looking at the first kinda solved mystery, what is Mexus? Mexus first appeared as a secondary antagonist to Ruin. Whenever you'd wear the Vanny mask for too long, he would appear and send an animatronic after you. We learned that Mexus was designed to keep the Mimic contained, so when Cassie deactivates the computer, the Mimic is free and you know the rest. We then saw him in the back of this van in the Help Wanted 2 update, as inputting the code 4625, Mexus would come out of the computer before the van would speed off. And most recently in Secret of the Mimic, we kinda saw Mexus again. Like I mentioned, we were introduced to this supercomputer in the FNAF 1 prototype pizzeria. Design-wise, it may lead you to believe that this is Mexus. But of course we know this is F10N4. If anything, this game suggests that there are two supercomputers, F10N4 and Mexus, which we know stands for Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage Number 1, or also known as the Cradle program. That's right, Mexus is the first supercomputer, while Fiona was most likely the second computer made. Based on this information and the text logs, we can assume that Edwin designed these computers to store the different Mimic programs. After David's death, Edwin would move M1 into the F10N4 computer, and after M2 would become violent, the plan would be to move the program into Mexus or use it to contain him like it does in Ruin. The only issue here is that Mexus was the first computer, so why would Edwin move M1 into the second computer and not Mexus? Unless he had Mexus as a first backup computer in case M2 went rogue, but this seems unlikely. It could also just be possible that these are somehow the exact same computer, meaning M1 is Mexus. But this also seems unlikely, and the game suggests that there are actually two separate systems. So although we know Mexus is a separate computer than F10N4 and that it was created by Edwin, this still doesn't explain the Blue Rabbit character we face in Ruin. This is where the theories can honestly go either way, with it simply being an AI, someone's consciousness, or being possessed by a character. If it is possession, this could be anyone from William Afton because it matches the style of his characters, Henry Emily continuing to fix the mistakes of his past, as here it can be argued he had a role in Edwin's downfall which led to the evil Mimic. It could be Edwin trying to stop the Mimic, or really anyone else trying to keep him contained. I do think Secret of the Mimic finally gave us some backstory and context to this character, especially with it being an older computer from the 70s. But with the character itself, we still don't know anything about it. I do think it will have some role in the next FNAF game, as it seems like it's the only thing that can really keep the Mimic contained. So maybe Cassie and other characters will venture back to Mexus to reactivate it, and in that moment we'll find out who they really are. Something else I just want to throw out there, because I think it is a really cool detail, is the explanation to the Help Wanted 2 update where Mexus is taken away in this van, since it really didn't lead to anything. Well, when I was live a few months ago, one of the viewers gave a perfect explanation. Mr. 3D Gaming proposed the idea that this ending was representing Mexus in the form of the blueprint being in the data driver and it being taken away from the manor by Arnold. Arnold does escape with the Cradle blueprints in the parachute ending, and it's a thing that the Mimic takes back after stopping him from escaping. So instead of looking at this as something that literally happened, we can instead look at it in a metaphorical sense, where it was showing us the Secret of the Mimic ending, where Arnold attempts to escape with the Mexus blueprints, which is why we even see the van drive off in such a hurry, just like we did in the actual ending. But with more questions than answers, Mexus stays as kinda solved. Now looking at Glitchtrap, who is just as controversial as someone like Burntrap, who is this? Now I won't really argue about him being William, since most of the evidence is the same as him being Burntrap, with William soul possessing a circuit board, being uploaded into Help Wanted, and then becoming Glitchtrap. Although this could be possible, I instead want to focus on him being the Mimic, which is a wide consensus among the community, and more specifically which version. With Secret of the Mimic, it introduced the possibility of Glitchtrap being M1, M2, or even M3, as some theorize it's a new Mimic program. One of the main differences with Glitchtrap that separates this design from the rest of William's appearances is the fact that this is a mascot suit and not a springlock suit. A difference that theorists like FNAF pointed out for the mascots having a much more important role than we realized and have continued to, and now of course we know that he was right with Secret of the Mimic, where mascots played a huge role like with Tiger Rock and Party Time Chica. So this fact alone convinces many, including myself, to say that Glitchtrap is the Mimic, and I was even surprised that we never saw the mascot suit itself in Secret of the Mimic. It could have been anywhere in the manor, and it does make a lot of sense as this would be something made by Edwin Murray. But again, now it just lies on deciding which program it is. If it is M1 or F10N4, this would mean that the program designed to mimic Fiona was uploaded into the Help Wanted game. So why would Fiona decide to now mimic William Afton and his actions? Well, this could be that it's mimicking the information of the game and of Fazbear's entertainment. The Mimic program acts on the data it receives, so here it's taking in all the information of the game and of Fazbear's like the MCI, causing M1 to recreate it in one of the endings. So the Mimic is simply using Afton's personality and face as like a tool. But with M2, it would be a scenario where the endoskeleton itself and a separate copy of its program exist at the same time and are working together. It can be argued that with the physical mimic being trapped, the virtual mimic is helping to get him out. M2 would be uploaded into Help Wanted, would represent himself as William and as Nightmarian, which I discussed earlier, and then he would take over Vannesa so she could help him with freeing the physical mimic. Now whether this be through burntrap or just releasing the mimic to be free in the pizzaplex, glitchtrap and the mimic are working together. It can also be argued that Glitchtrap represented himself as Helpy in Ruin and in Help Wanted too, as in this ending we see the player keep the Glitchtrap virus alive as we see him exiting this charging station. Helpy would have been using the player to complete tasks to collect these Fast Force toys, which is how Glitchtrap emerged from the charging station. But at the same time, in the other ending, which fans both regard as canon, we see Glitchtrap being destroyed by Vanny, freeing herself. So by the time Ruin happens in the timeline, Glitchtrap is most likely already destroyed, leaving just the physical M2 mimic. The last option is that it's a new program that can be known as M3. When M1 or M2 are being uploaded into the Help Wanted game, it could have manifested an entirely new virus known as Glitchtrap. But I would say this theory has the least supporting evidence, but like a lot of theories in this video, this brings us right back to the beginning. If Glitchtrap even is the mimic, we need to figure out which program it is since there are now two, and what this means for the rest of the lore. With Security Breach, solving Glitchtrap can tell us what direction Stewa was headed in terms of Vanny and even Burntrap. This answer would also help us to make connections to the mimic and to other games like Help Wanted 1 and 2. So I think we're on the right path, but even then we lack a clear answer. For the final mystery on this list and video, what is the scooper? Of course, one of the main questions is if this is the same scooper from FNAF Sister Location. Now design wise they're clearly different and the rooms they are located in also seem to be different, but there have been times where the franchise has changed the designs of characters even though they are meant to be the same, so could this be what's happening here? They seem to serve the exact same purpose, so this conclusion wouldn't be that far stretched. Or another way to look at it is through the Remnant Plex theory by She's Always Nervous, where it's suggested that this is a modernized scooper by Fazbear's Entertainment used to extract remnant energy from victims that is then used to power the Pizzaplex and its animatronics. Of course, check out the full video because this idea is really cool and unique. In terms of the scooper ending, we saw the scooper scoop the mimic out of the lion costume, presumably defeating him. But like I said earlier, the elevator ending is most likely canon, which is why I think the scooper will have some role in the next FNAF game. Like Mexis, it's clear the scooper is one of the only ways to stop the mimic, so it might have a much bigger role in the future game where we could learn about its past. In Help Wanted 2, we did see the mimic wearing his lion costume and not just as his normal appearance in Ruin, maybe pointing some importance to the scooper and its ending. There just has to be a reason the game didn't showcase the normal mimic. But in my opinion, this is a mystery that we can cover rather fast since most of it is just speculation. The scooper doesn't appear for that long besides the ending, and although it is a mystery to be solved, besides its connections to Sister Location, we just have ideas about the scooper. So with all that said, has FNAF Security Breach been solved 4 years later? I would say no, but we are definitely getting closer, and I think with the next FNAF game, we should have all the information to do so. Now I think one of the things that made it so hard to solve Security Breach was the production of the game. Through the Dako and Scott Cawthon interview, we learned that Scott Cawthon only gave parts of the story and ideas to Steelwood Studios, which left them having to work with what they had in creating a story that they believed was right. Scott Cawthon didn't directly say to put things in certain areas of the Pizzaplex or to make certain characters do this or that. Steelwood only had components of characters and a story. So ultimately, they didn't have a solid plot to go off of. Meaning Scott and Steelwood Studios had the same pieces telling different stories, which led to it feeling like we were solving two different stories. Like one that focused on the Mimic while the other focused on the Aftons, or one that focused on Gregory while the other focused on Vannesa. This was fixed with later games, which is why it's so much easier to theorize and to solve them, the reason Ruin didn't have any unsolved mysteries. So I think this leaves us still trying to solve parts of Security Breach. If you want to look at things specifically, things we still have unsolved include Gregory, Vannesa, Glamrock Freddy, the Sticky Note Room, Princess Quest, Burntrap, the Blob, the Aftons, Nightmarian, Glitchtrap, the Scooper, and Mexis. This might seem like a lot, but with a lot of these mysteries, I feel like we're so close to solving them and that all we need is a piece or two of the puzzle to finally get an answer. In terms of numbers, if we have 15 mysteries in total and only 5 of them are solved, we've technically solved 33.33% of Security Breach. But this list and what parts of it are solved can 100% be debatable, and this was just my take on it. But all these amazing theorists up on screen have played a huge role in solving this game, and I'm telling you guys, it's just one more FNAF game like Ruin 2 and we can finally solve Security Breach. Newer games are actively solving Security Breach, like with Secret of the Mimic and Help Wanted 2, giving us so much more information and context. So with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and what do you guys think? How have we solved FNAF Security Breach? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories and what your list of mysteries would look like. Let me know if you enjoyed this retrospective video, as I really do think one can be made on every single Steelwood FNAF game. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you guys so much for watching. William Afton, the man behind the slaughter, who is arguably the most infamous character from the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. But with this character, we still have tons of mysteries that I've explored in different videos throughout this channel. I've tried to solve topics like where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, where William is being tortured, how many souls are actually in Ultimate Custom Night, and his role in Secret of the Mimic that connects to other FNAF games. So in this video, not only am I going to combine my past theories on William Afton making one long video, but I'm also going to add additional commentary and evidence based on your comments and feedbacks that I think make these theories much stronger. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why Ultimate Custom Night takes place in this arcade machine, why all 50 characters in UCN are actually individual souls torturing William, and finally why William was in Murray's costume manor during Secret of the Mimic stalking us and the Mimic. Oh, and because most theories have a cool name attached with it, of course I have to do the same, starting with what I'm calling Wilcade, and no, not Wilcare. But first, I am happy to announce that we now officially have a G Fuel discount code. This just wouldn't have been possible without your guys' support, so use code BRONZEFILMS for 20% off orders or click the link in the description, and thank you all so much for the support. How is William Afton possessing an arcade machine in Security Breach? Well, to find out, let's look at the latest FNAF book in the franchise. But for a disclaimer, by no means did I come up with this theory, nor am I the first. This is an ongoing thought as more games have been released. The FNAF franchise is made up of different forms of content with lore and mystery for the community to attempt to solve. And this week, an addition was just made to one of those forms of content, the latest book, Five Nights at Freddy's Tickets of Fun. Now this thing has a ton, and I mean a ton of lore that finally tells us more about characters, pizzerias, and even about the missing children incident, and maybe how there should have been one more child involved. So you could really make an entire video on each of these topics, but I want to focus on a small part of this book that not only connects to the old FNAF games, but it might be the key to understanding parts of the modern lore and timeline. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover how FNAF Ticket to Fun solves William Afton and how his soul has been possessing an arcade machine this entire time. But for a quick disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers for Five Nights at Freddy's Ticket to Fun, so if you'd rather wait until you check out the book for yourself, swipe away from this video and come back when you're done. Ticket to Fun was released a few days ago, and it gives us an in-universe experience from fans and employees of the animatronics, restaurants, into parts of the lore that have never been explored before. We learn things like that there was a failed MCI victim based on a letter from a fan named Timmy, who was lured into a dark closet by Bonnie for a special prize but had to leave to open his presents. Or that children have most likely seen Golden Freddy based on the hidden section of the crossword puzzle. Using a UV light, we see the message, "I saw another Freddy," with a hidden word reading, Golden. And we also got confirmation to a popular theory that I'm going to relate to William Afton, arcade theory. Gibby Horror Homestead is someone who needs no introduction. I'm sure many of you have seen this almost 9-hour long video or some of their theories in FNAF discussion videos. And you probably also heard of arcade theory, a theory saying that the arcade machines in the FNAF games are haunted or possessed the exact same way the animatronics are. The ghosts are connected to the machines, and the human characters in the FNAF world can actually play them. So for example, the reason at the end of FNAF 6 we have images from the minigames is because these are real in-universe diegetic games that the characters could see. You can watch this amazing video to get the full context, so of course all credit to this theory goes to Gibby. So when looking at Ticket to Fun, we first get this paragraph titled "All Work, No Play," and it reads, "If any of the game cabinets turn on during the course of the night, please immediately shut them down to conserve power. If the game does not shut down, even if unplugged, immediately return to your post. Ignore any messages that may appear on the screens. This is a known glitch with no current fix. Employees found playing arcade games while on the clock will be immediately terminated either by us or by the animatronics they didn't hear coming." I mean, arcade machines turning on even after being unplugged and displaying messages just screams possessed, and messages could include "it's me" or even "save them." It doesn't really get clearer than arcades staying on, but for more evidence we have this image of Charlie from the Security Puppet minigame. The only way Fazbear's Entertainment would be able to obtain this image of 8-bit Charlie is if the minigame actually existed in the context of the story. Now it's up to debate if this is telling us that Charlie is possessing an arcade machine or that this is some sort of remnant manifestation, which could be why it's only visible under the UV light. We also get images of cars from Midnight Motorist that can also only be seen under UV, possibly meaning that the Midnight Motorist arcade machine is possessed and that the characters from FNAF have played this minigame. It's even mentioned as one of Timmy's favorite arcade machines in the paragraph I mentioned earlier. So these few short images and paragraphs tell us that the idea of souls possessing arcade machines is possible, which is exactly what I think is happening later in the FNAF timeline. I think that William's soul is possessing this Balloon Boy arcade machine, either voluntary or involuntary, which then allowed him to return as Burntrap. Now I know that sounds a bit random, so going down the list of evidence, during PAX West 2024 and outside of the Secret of the Mimic demo, fans could play an arcade version of FNAF Ultimate Custom Night, with Dako even recreating his infamous 50-20 mode celebration. Now sure, this could just be something Stu will put out for fans to enjoy while waiting in line, but it could also easily include
lore to chew on.
where UCN takes place has always been up for discussion, whether that be a purgatory, a nightmare, or even in a different dimension. But what if this was a way to tell us that William's soul was trapped inside of an arcade machine by the vengeful spirit? Meaning someone else inside the FNAF world could have found this arcade machine and found a way to get William out of the game. Shout out to this comment who reminded me the arcade machine was at the demo, so I think it makes the most sense that Vanessa was the one who found this machine. Which brings us to the modern lore of the timeline. Down in the sinkhole and in the FNAF 6 room where Burntrap is, we find evidence of Vanny living down there while Burntrap, you could say, was still cooking. We find the Vanny logo spray painted on the wall, a bed, blankets, newspapers, and food, all scattered around this area. We even find tally marks for probably each day she stayed down there in the sinkhole. Most importantly, we also find this Balloon World arcade machine with the screen glitching in and out. This is where I think William was being held captive. This is the arcade machine that I think William's soul is possessing. When playing the arcade machine, you play as Balloon Boy, trying to avoid different obstacles between a night and day setting. Occasionally, a small purple glitch effect will appear on screen. If the player reaches it quick enough, the minigame will have a glitch purple look to it. And if you follow the outline of the glitch terrain, you can continue the minigame until you reach the very end, and enlarge eclipse behind Balloon Boy with the message, "Good night." Now this minigame also screams possessed to me, or that something supernatural is happening here. This small purple glitch effect could even be a glimpse to William's soul itself, and that the entire screen going purple is how William's soul is possessing this arcade machine. The same way something would go wrong with other minigames like in Security Puppet where Charlie's locked outside, and this has already basically been proven to be possession. The carnival setting of the arcade could also be a reference to Fall Fest, which at this point is an infamous event in the FNAF franchise that has finally been expanded on in Secret of the Mimic. This new game suggested that the Fall Fest fire, which most likely took place between the year 1970 to 1979, was responsible for the death of Fiona Murray, wife of Edwin Murray, who both owned Murray's Costume Manor, a contracting business for Fazbear's Entertainment. This side of FNAF has its own insane lore that I'm sure you've seen be discussed by now, but the Fall Fest fire that has been teased since the very first Help Wanted game was probably caused by William Afton. You can watch this video to see why I think that's the case, so the Dark Force and Eclipse being here could be a way to represent the fire, or I could be reaching at nothing. But this arcade machine is a good way to explain where William was in the context of the story that allowed him to return. However you want to look at it, if William was trapped inside this arcade by the vengeful spear, or if he found a way to preserve his life with this arcade game, this can tell us where William's soul was between FNAF 6 to Security Breach. The arcade machine even being there was always an odd detail to me. Vanny doesn't strike me as someone who would play arcade machines on our downtime while something like this is happening, so now we can say it was for a much greater reason. Another interesting detail is that we can find the exact same Balloon World arcade machine in the daycare center secret room. Now who was in this room is also up for debate, with some saying it was Gregory, Cassie, or even the Mimic. But whoever this is, maybe the Balloon World arcade machines act very similar to the Princess Quest arcades, where it's almost like a hive mind that was shared between the arcades, as you had to beat every single one to stop the glitch trap virus. So maybe whoever was in this room had this specific arcade here because they wanted to either stop or free William's soul from this arcade. And maybe that's the reason we see the exact same arcade in these two areas. Vanny would find a way to extract his essence or soul and would throw it into the Burntrap endoskeleton or into the new corpse we see wrapped around the suit. That's why in an almost Frankenstein moment, we see Burntrap emerge from the charging station as William is given a new life. This could also explain why Vanny was in the sinkhole for so long. All the tally marks are a day of experimenting and trying to get William out of the arcade machine and into a new corpse. We could even take this a step further and relate it to what Scott Cawthon said about Burntrap in Security Breach.
And I can give you a really easy example for this. And I'm hesitant to say this because I don't like messing with the lore, but I think in this case it's okay. When it comes to Burntrap, originally Burntrap was never supposed to move. He was supposed to just be something you saw in the corners, or like if you were walking past machinery, you might be able to peek in between two things and see him in the corner or propped up against a wall, almost like a some kind of decaying movie prop, and you never fully understood what his purpose was. And he had a very specific purpose, and I'm not going to say what that purpose was, but realistically, he never moved. Well, obviously that's not what we got in Security Breach. In Security Breach, we got a capsule opening and purple smoke flowing out and him climbing out and coming to get you. And so it's just not quite the same thing. So, but anyway,
I've already made a whole video on what Scott Cawthon said about Burntrap, but I also think we could relate it to arcade theory. Similar to how images of Charlie would manifest into the Ticket to Fun pages, what if this is a manifestation of William's soul? The reason he doesn't move is because he's not actually there, acting like a decaying movie prop. Maybe Scott Cawthon gave Stewart the idea of William being trapped inside of an arcade machine, but Stewart took it in a different way that Scott had visioned. However, now I'm just throwing some ideas out there. But addressing the elephant in the room, this can't be a video on the modern FNAF lore if it doesn't mention the Mimic, the franchise's latest antagonist that we finally got a backstory to in Secret of the Mimic. Which is why it's still being debated if the Mimic was planned since the very start and that the lore was supposed to move on from the Afton family. It can even be argued that Burntrap is actually the Mimic, and it's a possibility I went over in one of my latest theories. When working on this theory, it was mainly under the assumption that William was meant to come back and that he is Burntrap, but by no means is any of this confirmed. Especially when there's plenty of evidence saying that the Mimic is Burntrap and even Glitchtrap, which is why I want to emphasize this video is just a theory. Although Ticket to Fun did honestly confirm arcade theory in my opinion, it doesn't automatically mean William is in the arcade machine. Especially since if anything you could argue that the Glitchtrap virus is instead William and that he would be inside of the Princess Quest arcade machines. Although I personally believe that the Mimic is the Glitchtrap virus and the Mimic and William Afton were both around at the same time just in different ways, it could go either way and nothing is really confirmed. But with this latest FNAF book saying that it is possible for souls to possess arcade machines, I am simply throwing out the idea that this is what happened with William in the modern FNAF lore. I definitely think this book is trying to tell us about midnight motorists and that there's more happening with this minigame. But that's a topic for another video, and I'm excited to see people tackle this minigame once again. Future Bronze here. With that said, now let's look at additional evidence for Wilcade based on your comments. And now UCN taking place in an arcade machine could explain other features with this game that correlate with arcades, like the coins and different collectibles you collect, or like the fact that there are high scores in game modes. These would be high scores and game modes that exist within the FNAF universe, so it could also explain Old Man Consequences. Old Man Consequences first made his appearance in FNAF World as a minor character. He was featured in a secret ending where the player would reach the end of the map and encounter this character fishing alone. He only has 2 pieces of dialogue, as all he says is, "I'm sorry to say that you have gone too deep into the code, there's no way back out." He also says, "My name is Old Man Consequences, come have a seat and let's fish for a while, you have nowhere else to go." He then made his next appearance in FNAF Ultimate Custom Night. To get this easter egg, the player must set all animatronics to a rating of 0 and only keep Old Man Consequences at 1. Then when you're in the game and when you press a button to catch the fish, you will then be taken to the easter egg. Here you get the exact same screen as the one in FNAF World, but this time Old Man Consequences has very cryptic and confusing dialogue. He first says, "Come and sit with me a while." He then says, "Leave the demon to his demons, rest your own soul." There is nothing else. After this, the player then walks into the lake drowning themselves, and this is when the easter egg ends. So there could be a couple of possibilities, like what if OMC is an arcade character or a machine itself that the eventual spirit travels to when they have a conversation with them? The reason Old Man Consequences is seen in this 8-bit minigame format is because it takes place in an arcade machine. This could also connect to FNAF World, where for the longest time it's been believed that the entirety of this game takes place in an arcade machine as well. So because Old Man Consequences appears in both these games, he's actually appearing in 2 different arcade machines that once again exist in-universe. Now a lot of people argue that this arcade machine was actually tied in with Gregory, which is possible, but I think there's just as much of a chance that it's actually tied to William. But this is just a theory. So now we can look at what I'm calling the UCN 50, where there are actually 50 souls torturing William Afton and not just one as the vengeful spirit. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic just solves Ultimate Custom Night and its biggest mysteries. Mysteries that can finally help us understand characters like William Afton and how it's all connected to the modern lore and timeline. By now I'm sure many of you have seen amazing theories on Secret of the Mimic and on Edwin Murray's deceased son, David. Like theories by T-Dreads and Fazbear's Entertainment on God David, a theory by Flipside on Midnight Motorist and how David might be at the center of it all, and a theory by The Unwithered Truth on Ultimate Custom Night that I want to expand on today in this video. UCN is a game that divides the fandom in multiple aspects and is one of the more interesting games as there's a ton of unsolved and hidden mysteries. But now with Secret of the Mimic, I believe this newest game has finally provided us with some answers. But first I recommend checking out all these videos by these talented creators as they can fundamentally change what we know about the franchise. So my name is Bronze Films and let's go over how Secret of the Mimic tells us that there are dozens of souls torturing William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night. Starting with what we know about a new tragedy, Fall Fest.
What are you waiting for?
In order to truly cover Fall Fest, let's go back to the very start when it was first introduced. In the Help Wanted Dreadbreed DLC, we learn that this DLC takes place within the actual Fall Fest Carnival, as the game's hub contains a banner advertising Fall Fest 1983, an important year for the franchise. We then saw a poster for Fall Fest 1970 revealed in the Help Wanted 2 game hub. as we can also assume that the carousel minigame focusing around Moon where you have to fix the carousel while avoiding him, and the Carney minigame where you shoot at targets with a phaser blast for points, both took place in the Fall Fest Carnival itself, and up to this point we would only get more references and Easter eggs to this carnival. In Security Breach we found this arcade machine of Balloon Boy which took place in a carnival, this poster advertising Freddy's singing show. In Ruin we saw these carnival animal mascot suits, and even the Mimic wore a carnival lion suit in the Scooper ending. And now finally, with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, we now have concrete information on the Fall Fest Carnival, how it's connected to Fazbear's, and its eventual downfall, which I think is the big mystery we can connect to Ultimate Custom Night into this purgatory. Secret of the Mimic is centered around MCM, Murray's Costume Manor, a contracting business owned by Edwin that would create mascot suits and technology for companies and events. One of these companies was of course Fazbear's Entertainment, who commissioned various projects like Chica's Party World. This is the first project we hear of them working together on, a location we've known almost nothing about before this point. Here in a text log we learn that a client, or Fazbear's, is very happy with the design, and that Chica's design came from Fiona, Edwin Murray's wife. And of course we learn that MCM was commissioned to work on Fall Fest. We find the same Fall Fest 1970 poster from Help Wanted 2 alongside collectibles from the actual carnival. We find a snow globe from Fall Fest that looks similar to promotional art for the event featuring animatronics and even the puppet as a scarecrow. We even find an admissions ticket for Fall Fest, a ticket with the same colors from the poster and something we've never really seen before. And like I mentioned, it's assumed we already saw two exact attractions from Fall Fest 1970 and Help Wanted 2, meaning there was a Phaser Blast type of attraction that included the Carney animatronic that could have possibly been created by Edwin for Fazbear's, which could also mean that the other Rockstar animatronics were also part of the MCM catalog, which is why we see him show up once more in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator. And I think we can say the exact same thing about the Carousel minigame, as we know Moon was also created by Edwin. But most importantly, we learn that Edwin's wife Fiona decided to go to Fall Fest with the installation team because she felt that something was wrong.
Ed, I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fall Fest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong. Just in case. Trisha will babysit David while I'm gone. I love you both, and I'll be back next week.
This trip was supposed to last a week, but as we learn in another voice log, Fiona never returns and Edwin is forced to raise David completely on his own.
Oh, why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here with me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own? His life is ruined. My life is ruined.
But how and why? How did Fiona die at Fall Fest? Well, to find out, the first thing we know for almost certain is that it was a fire that killed her. The 1970s Fall Fest fire, a fire I'll mention again later on when talking about UCN. In both Help Wanted 2 Fall Fest minigames, both of them end with a secret level where the attraction catches fire. With the carousel minigame, you face Jacko Moon while fixing the carousel once more, but in the middle of the minigame, a fire will randomly start engulfing the attraction and Moon slowly. With the Carney minigames focused on FNAF 2, after completing the level like normal, the arm of the cardboard cutout of Dreadbear will snap off, causing electrical sparks to go flying, which will also cause a fire. The fire will spread across the wagons and even to Carney himself, which will end the minigame. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's 3 Phaser Blast level, we then see the aftermath of the fire while defending yourself against Springtrap. You'll find the wagons and even Carney completely burned with nothing in the attraction left. So it appears that a fire brought down Fall Fest, meaning we can assume it's what killed Fiona, and we almost know for certain who caused this fire, the franchise's most infamous killer, William Afton. Throughout this game, we learn how William Afton was slowly sabotaging Edwin's business and slowly taking over his own company. Through audio and text logs, we learn how William was in contact with a leak from MCM who gave him the contact information of all the employees of the company. And we also know some employees sold Edwin's work to most likely William.
Attention traders, admin wing permissions have been revoked. And no, you can't clear out your desks. You stole my work. Now your jackets, purses, and coffee mugs, and anything else belongs to me. Maybe I'll go find someone to sell your stuff to. How does that feel?
We also learned that William and Fazbear's Entertainment kept delaying a project that Edwin was working on for them, the prototype FNAF 1 location. In the research and development area, we can find the prototype FNAF 1 pizzeria that has the exact same hallways, offices, and stage. Of course, there are also the prototype animatronics of Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, and Chica, alongside the FNAF 1 endoskeletons. So after delaying the project over and over, Edwin would lose his friends, money, and after the death of his family, he would finally lose his company and everything he's built.
I feel stupid recording this, but I just hope somehow that you can still hear me. I can't do this alone. The change orders are killing me. Our employees, my friends, they keep leaving. The money's gone. I just need to finish the new Fazbear project, and then everyone will come back. We can get back to normal. I miss my friends. Our friends. I miss you. I miss you more than you'll ever know.
And clearly William is successful in taking over Edwin's life, so what if to make sure that Edwin's life would crumble and he would lose everything, what if William killed Fiona with the Fall Fest fire? I think the first major piece of evidence is the carousel minigame. In the Jacko Moon level, when looking from the outside perspective, we actually see that the fire started in this barn and that it then spread to the rest of the attraction. So what if William was inside that barn? He would start the fire where no one would be able to see him and would then disappear. Fiona would be somewhere else in the carnival helping the installation team and most likely didn't know a fire started until it was too late. And it appears that Moon.exe actually confirms this. As I'm sure many of you know by now, Moon.exe is a minigame accessible through the helper terminals and acts as a way to tell a story about the Murrays. There's a ton to go over in Moon.exe, but most importantly you run into Sun, who we can confidently say is meant to represent Fiona, who is described as the old woman inside of the rundown cabin in the woods. We know this for certain as we face the F10 and 4 program, which is the name of the AI also known as M1, a program created by Edwin to babysit David. So when this program or Fiona begins to talk to us, the monitors behind the computer display the exact same icon of Sun from Moon.exe, which is most likely saying that they are one and the same and can be used to represent one another. And when looking back to the minigame, we find statues that are clearly supposed to represent Edwin and Fiona, but Fiona's statue is burnt with the Fall Fest globe collectible that I mentioned earlier right in front of it, which could imply that this statue or Fiona was burnt by a fire that occurred in this event in the snow globe, Fall Fest. And on top of that, you can also find a seamstress building that was burnt to the ground, another way to show Fiona was in that fire, as we know she loves sewing together hand puppets, like the Foxy Crew hand puppets we see in the theater. And finally, when facing Big Top and handing him the Fall Fest admissions ticket that I mentioned earlier, he says, "This is the one. This is where Sun left, leaving them behind." I think it's obvious that this is yet another way how the game is telling us how she died. The one is the Fall Fest Carnival where Sun or Fiona would leave to but would never return from. And for one final piece of evidence, in the Carney minigame that I mentioned earlier, in the final level, the only thing we see left after the fire is Springtrap or William Afton, which could be a way to tell us that he's the only thing that remained and stayed alive after the fire, since he caused it and was able to escape. But enough about Fall Fest, now we can finally take a look at William Afton's personal hell.
Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Custom Night really needs no introduction. It's William Afton being tortured for eternity by the one you should not have killed. Who this is a controversial debate on its own, with some believing it's the Crying Child, Cassidy, Andrew, and in the Unwielded Truth theory, he even suggested it could be David, Edwin's deceased son from Secret of the Mimic. Now for the sake of this theory, and because I love that video, we are going to say it's David, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm proposing that David isn't alone in holding William in this purgatory. Not only is there 1, 5, or even 10 other souls, but I think we can go as far to say that all 50 selectable characters represent a soul tormenting William. Now before you click off the video, hear me out as I go through a surprisingly decent amount of evidence. It's already been theorized that there are other souls in UCN based on voice lines that make it seem like the one you should not have killed isn't alone. So because of this, I decided to go back and to listen to every single voice line of every single animatronic. And I found that there are at least 15 different voice lines from different characters that indicate other souls are aware of where they are and what they are doing. They also just aren't the one you should not have killed speaking through them like with the mediocre melodies. They're completely separate souls who would want to torture William. Take a listen to these voice lines from Withered Bonnie and Ballora.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped or is it you? Perhaps it is us both.
These are strange circumstances that have brought us together.
Withered Bonnie's line implies that even he doesn't know how he ended up here and that it might have even been against his will, something I'll touch more on soon. With Ballora, once again she is aware of the circumstances, and this feels like someone new speaking, who may have also known William at one point. Now take a listen to these voice lines from Nightmare Balloon Boy and Rockstar Bonnie.
They're
just isn't room in here for both of us.
So good to see you again, my truest friend. But now your life must end.
With Nightmare Balloon Boy, we once more see the reassuring idea of there being someone else here with William, as he is even being tortured by the same nightmares he would force test subjects to go through. With Rockstar Bonnie, whoever soul this is, was true friends with William at one point when they're both presumably alive, which brings me to the core of this theory. William Afton has had much more victims than any of us could have anticipated. More than the souls of Charlie Emily, possibly David Murray, souls of the missing children incident, or even the dead children incident. We're talking about dozens of victims, and I think most of them came from one place, Fall Fest. Like I said, if William was responsible for murdering Fiona in a fire, to me it's hard to believe that she would be the only victim or casualty. Especially since in Help Wanted 2, it seems that we are playing these games while they're active and while the park would be open. So when this fire would randomly start in a barn and would spread to attractions, this would all happen when Fall Fest is actively open. Meaning there would be Fiona's installation team, employees of Fall Fest, and families, all most likely caught in this fire and became William Afton's casualties. They would all then become vengeful spirits with the perfect place for a reunion where they could all get revenge, being William Afton's purgatory or nightmare fueled by agony, depending on what you believe in. When looking back to the voice lines, now take a listen to these lines by Orville and Rockstar Foxy while keeping the Fall Fest fire in mind.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
Yarg, ye play with fire, and sometimes ye get burned.
With Foxy, obviously we get a reference to a fire, which I know is something broad, but we can't connect this Rockstar to Carney, who was in the Fall Fest fire and is technically a Rockstar animatronic as well. But this line about a fire is just the beginning. With Orville, he is definitely referring to Henry Emily, who tried to free William and the other souls in animatronics in Pizzeria Simulator. But of course, the one you should not have killed stops this and is speaking through Orville. But at the end of the line, he says, no matter how many times they burn us, that's right, multiple souls. Sure, this could be referring to the other souls in FFPS like Charlie or Elizabeth, but that game suggests they were able to move on and that every soul in that game moved on besides William. In a way, all remaining souls had their happiest day. But victims from Fall Fest wouldn't be able to move on, especially since it seemed like they were never mentioned anywhere else in the timeline. So they could be the other souls Orville is referencing to holding William back. Now take a listen to lines that are at this point infamous voice lines from Jacko Chica. With the first line, Jacko Chica could clearly act as a reminder of the Fall Fest fire and his actions of burning innocent people. With the next line, we again hear from the one you should not have killed, but this time he isn't speaking through Jacko Chica. Chica just mentions him as she greets William from the quote-unquote fire, maybe the Fall Fest fire. If this were to really be the case, then I think we can even say that this is Fiona's vengeful spirit itself. We know in a way Fiona was responsible for creating Chica and Chica's party world, so is it really that far-stretched to say that this is a way to represent her? Sure, we mostly saw her through the Sun characters and through the puppets, but these are her creations just like Chica. That's why Fiona's greeting William from the fire, since that's where she was murdered. This could mean that this is a mother and son duo torturing William in this nightmare, which is kinda wholesome in a way. Aww. But to really just throw an idea out there, let's take a listen and look at the character of Nightmare Freddy.
I am given flesh to be your tormentor.
Here this line implies that David could have given these vengeful souls quote-unquote flesh and new identities as animatronics from William Afton's past. That's why we see Scraptrap and Springtrap. They obviously aren't actually William, but different souls given his identity to almost mock him and his failures. And this next line only supports this even further.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
This is clear confirmation that the one you should not have killed is rebuilding these animatronics for this nightmare, and again, I think it's also to pair an animatronic with each soul. Also take a look at Nightmare Freddy's icon when selecting characters. We see Freddy in the back with the Freddles in front of him. Looks normal, right? But to me it looks like a dad posing for a picture with his 3 children. Okay, whoa, I know that seems crazy and just wrong, and I could definitely be looking too deep into things just like Mr. Hippo says.
maybe it doesn't mean anything at all. Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all.
But in context of Fall Fest, it could make a lot of sense. Like I said earlier, if it really was open when this fire occurred, then of course there would be families like a dad and his kids. If they also got caught up in this fire and became casualties of William Afton, then it could make sense they would become vengeful spirits that would return in the form of Nightmare Freddy and his Freddles. But really this is just speculative, and I admit it doesn't have the strongest evidence towards it. Also, because this is William Afton's personal nightmare, we of course see artifacts from his life, like posters from different pizzerias, a recreation of a room from his house he most likely used only for experiments, and we can actually find a reference to Fall Fest. In Pizzeria Simulator, we were introduced to this Spookfest poster, which at the time didn't have a meaning to, nor could we connect it to anything. But then in the Help Wanted and in the Dreadbreak DLC I've talked about all video, we saw this poster return in this barn, which to me is saying that Fall Fest and Spookfest are one and the same, different names for the same event. But we also saw this variation of a Fall Fest poster in Ultimate Custom Night and in one of the hallways. If everything around him is supposed to be a reminder of his misdeeds, then this poster would be perfect. It's where he would take dozens of lives as casualties, and having to stare at this poster over and over while being tormented by his own creations seems like a fitting end for this character. Although if we're saying the majority of these souls came from Fall Fest, there is still a chance that there are some souls we're familiar with. Unwither Truth already brought up a lot of great evidence to why the crying child could possibly be represented through Nightmare Fredbear, and why he would even need to torture William. So if this really is a reunion, I do believe CC could be a part of this group. Or instead of them directly being in Afton's nightmare, it could also relate to memories. Now I know earlier I said that victims of the MCI or Charlie Emily most likely have moved on, which I still believe is true, so what if it's the agony of their memories which is making them return? We know memories have had a crucial component in the franchise, and especially with these newer games like in FNAF Help Wanted 2. That's why we have two puppets and two different Charlies, two sets of memories both caused by William, which could also be why they sound very different.
Seeing you powerless is like music to me. There is room for one more.
We could also apply the same reasoning to the victims of the Fall Fest fire, where it's the mix of the agony of their memories being in that fire that created this nightmare or purgatory for William. But I still personally like the idea more that it's their actual souls finally getting revenge with the help of David and even possibly Fiona. Now I don't know if this was all just a group chat created by David or something like that, since I don't really have a reasonable explanation to how they would all come together in one single place. But what I do know for certain is that it's all just a theory.
A game theory!
By no means am I saying that anything in this video is confirmed or that it should be taken as canon, especially since we actually don't know anything about the Fall Fest fire. Yes, we finally got some information about it in Secret of the Mimic and how it's connected to Fiona and her death. But besides that, who caused it, why, and if there were any other casualties could simply go any other way. I also understand the criticism of even using Secret of the Mimic to solve parts of the earlier story, as when these games were released, we can assume that Scott didn't have the Mimic and this new family planned all the way down the line. Instead, I think it was just ideas Scott had that were fleshed out games later and would then be connected back to the original games, which is why I think multiple souls in UCN would even work. So just take all of this as speculation, and again, it's just a theory. Future Bronze here again. With the UCN 50 theory, I'm really happy with how things turned out, but based on the comments, things I want to bring up is why Fiona even went to Fall Fest and if William really caused the fire. Based on the voice logs, we know Fiona only went with the Fall Fest crew because of a bad feeling, so is there more to it? Well, some theories suggest that Fiona was being blackmailed by William in order to get her there. Fiona could have been catching on to William's plan to take over MCM, so William could have threatened her to get her to Fall Fest where he would have started the fire. Another option is that some spirit or soul had a role, either through them communicating with her or manipulating her into going. But who the soul would be is harder to decipher. With the fire itself, of course, another popular theory is that Edwin caused it, just accidentally. Because Edwin would be rushing his inventions, the one that would be used in Fall Fest would malfunction, causing a fire which would then kill Fiona. Edwin would be aware of this, and this grief could just be more reason that he would want to create M1. He's trying to bring back his wife that he was responsible for losing. But like the theory itself, this is just speculation, and I think if we were to get some sort of Fall Fest project, we could finally learn everything we need to know about it. But finally, moving on to what I'm calling Will's silhouette. I know, so creative. Let's look at this silhouette from FNAF Secret of the Mimic. On September 16th, the first patch update was released for the latest FNAF project, Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. As expected, it included bug fixes and things you would usually expect with this sort of update. But what none of us expected was for this update to include a lore, and I mean the type of lore that inspired me to create this entire video. a silhouette in the distance of Murray's costume manor that I think is the most infamous villain from the franchise. This update is what I think broke the FNAF timeline, and I'm going to try to fix it. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why William Afton knew about Remnant since 1979, how he learned to stuff bodies into suits from the Mimic, and why he might have even been in possession of the Mimic this entire time. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button as we go over how this update is the start to solving the earlier games and their timeline. Like I mentioned, at the very beginning of the game, you find this office where Dispatch talks to you, and across from you, you'll find this window with a silhouette moving and watching you. Now your first thought might be that it's just Digityper, but the issue here is that this silhouette is still here even after Jackie throws Digityper into this wall. And why would Steelwool add a dedicated silhouette that is always watching us just for it to be Digityper? Another popular theory suggests that it's Edwin, who is actually alive unlike the game suggests, here to fix his mistakes and to retrieve the Mimic. It could also just be anything related to Edwin, like his ghost that is possessing Mary's costume manor. Although it seems something like this is the case, for reasons I'll mention later in the video, I still don't think it's Edwin. I believe that this silhouette is none other than William Afton, here to retrieve what he believes is his and to discover mysteries along the way. Right off the bat, the reason William Afton was even represented as Purple Guy wasn't because he was literally purple, but because he acted as a shadowy evil figure. He was the shadow that we saw in the earlier FNAF games, like in the FNAF 2 Foxy minigame or in the Give Cake minigame when Purple Guy murders Charlie. That's why in Midnight Motorist, we see his color palette as yellow, the opposite of purple since he is no longer in the shadows throughout the minigame. It can even be argued that he has a shadow-like presence over MCM, as he slowly takes over Edwin's business, characters, and even his home, which I'll return to later. Every time we see William Afton, he's represented as the shadow, so why wouldn't this apply to Secret of the Mimic? But if we really are saying this is William Afton, why? Well, I think the main reason is to retrieve the Mimic himself. At this point, you could find 7 different bodies inside MCM scattered around different areas or rooms. These are 7 different people from teams who have all failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics, with there even being text logged from their last moments before being killed by the Mimic. Outside of the manor, you can also find an abandoned work van that is run down and destroyed. We can assume it belonged to one of the other teams that were sent to MCM, and this van serves as a small clue to their disappearances. So if Fazbear's Entertainment sent this many people but they all failed, then I think we can assume at one point William would just go himself to finally retrieve the Mimic schematics. If William Afton was really an MCM, and trust me, I know that's a big if, what else did he see? Well, I think he probably saw the bodies stuffed inside of mascots. They were everywhere, and maybe he even saw the abandoned work van outside. And I'm sure when many of you saw these bodies, you would think back to the MCI. But wait, this was well before the missing children incident, as this game takes place in 1979, while the missing children incident is believed to happen at the earliest in 1983, 4 years after the events of this game. Well, we know the Mimic most likely learned this from David, as in the books, which I know probably aren't canon, but I think we can still use them as supporting evidence. David and the Mimic were dressed up in mascot suits from Edwin's workshop. He could have also learned this from the performers using the mascots, as in one of David's drawings, we see the elephant mascot suit attending his birthday party, which was probably just one of Edwin's employees. This could mean that William mimicked the Mimic years later with the missing children incident, and not the other way around like we all suspected for years. The most infamous event from the franchise was inspired by an endoskeleton, and maybe these bodies were also where William learned of Remnant. Remnant is described as a type of energy substance infused with the souls and memories of those who possess the animatronics. William could have been inspired by these bodies that at this point were possessing the mascots. As a fellow theorist, Logan Entertainment pointed out in a video on the Blob, when you first encounter the Mimic in the elephant suit and near the crate where he escapes from, you find an incomplete head of an elephant suit. Taking a closer look at the head, there appears to be a small light source, and on rare occasions, the light source within the head glows very bright and clearly looks possessed. We can even compare this mask to the bad ending of FNAF 3, where we see the main animatronics alongside Golden Freddy having their mascots lit up by a bright light source, meaning they are still possessed. So what if this light source came from one of the dead technicians trying to possess the elephant head, trying to get Arnold's attention? Which to me could prove that their souls are still lingering around MCM, which William Afton would also take note of, and would begin to learn of Remnant. And like I said earlier, if he truly wanted to learn about Remnant and possession, then why not experiment on the same land that he discovered it on? I already made a video covering how William Afton took over Edwin's entire life, and this even includes his mansion and home. In the parachute ending, which is widely regarded as canon, we actually see the mansion being burnt down after escaping the Mimic. So what if, after this fire, William would save what was left of the mansion and remodeled it to the FNAF warehouse we all know and remember? During the good ending, where Arnold is able to reset the Mimic's programming to mimic David by playing him a bedtime story, we get a glimpse of David's room. And of course, this room is almost identical to the main room from FNAF 4 where all of the nights take place. They share a similar blue carpet, cabinets, and even patterns on the wall. and the closets where the Mimic and Foxy would come out of are almost identical, and most importantly, they both share the exact same toys. Toys that we've only ever seen in the FNAF 4 house that are once again returning in David's room. This just can't be a coincidence, and I think it's to tell us that they are the same. So after the MCM fire, William would fix what's left of the mansion and would create it into a similar house with the same toys and style of room. But why? Why fix Edwin's mansion? Well, I believe it was for his experiments, a room dedicated to William's test subjects with the nightmare animatronics. We can assume that the FNAF 4 house and the house shown in the minigames for this game are not the same. Here, the house is in front of a playground and is in front of some road. There is also a sidewalk connecting it to Freddy's family diner where the bite of 83 took place. So lining this house up with everything we know about the FNAF 4 house and even the house from Midnight Motorist, there are just simply no similarities. This house isn't on a hillside surrounded by a forest, and it is connected to a pizzeria, unlike the house from the Dreadbird DLC and from Secret of the Mimic. So William would have his real house near Freddy's family diner where the FNAF 4 minigames took place, and after Secret of the Mimic, he would have a secret house dedicated to his experiments that no one would know about. This could also be why none of the rooms from the minigames match up with the rooms from the actual nights, and we learn about William's experiments from the tales from the Pizzaplex novels. Like I said earlier, I know they've basically been proven to not be canon with new evidence from Secret of the Mimic, but we can still use them to help us prove claims like with Titophobia. Here the story focuses on a boy named Rory who is facing real-like nightmares of the nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4. He's repeating the same night before realizing the house he's in isn't even real and is able to escape through a vent. There he finds gas tanks of hallucinatory gas that was making him see the nightmare animatronics, but reality they were just mannequins on rails that would activate each single night. But he then finds himself in an underground bunker which is none other than Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, as he finds rooms from Sister Location and even the Funtime animatronics. So based on the story, it appears that William Afton has been experimenting on children in this fake house built on top of the Sister Location bunker. The nightmares are just hallucinations that would come from the gas from the underground bunker. Meaning, if we follow the same logic with this house from Secret of the Mimic that would eventually become the FNAF 4 house, the underground tunnels connecting the house to MCM would eventually become the Sister Location bunker. Meaning, after the fire, not only did William remodel Edwin's mansion to the FNAF 4 house, but he would also remodel the underground area into the Sister Location bunker that would eventually become Circus Baby's entertainment and rental with the Funtime animatronics. We can even find tanks of some sort of gas in one of the cameras in the bunker. And of course, we can also find the cameras inside the FNAF 4 house where William would most likely watch his experiments take place. But back to a point earlier, if this was William the entire time in MCM with us, it could mean that he's the one who ends up finding the Mimic and taking it for himself. In the parachute ending, we see the Mimic take Arnold's data driver before walking towards the forest. Now he could be going back to MCM, which he most likely sees as his home, or he's just wandering into the forest, so what happens to him is completely unknown. Maybe William would have found him walking along the road or found him going back to MCM, since William would also probably want to get away from the fire. He could then find a way to disable the Mimic and to then take the endoskeleton itself rather than the schematics. Or if you want to argue that the moon.exe ending is canon, after Arnold resets its programming, we have no idea what happened to the fixed Mimic. But if William was stalking us around MCM, he probably followed us to Edwin's mansion as well, where he would walk into the Mimic sleeping and Arnold just sitting there. If we were to predict what happened, he probably fired or even murdered Arnold while he took the Mimic for himself. Because his programming was already fixed and no longer a threat, this would be extremely easy unlike the parachute ending where we have no idea how William would apprehend him. So saying that William was in possession of the Mimic since what was before the first game in the FNAF timeline, what could this mean for the lore? Well, for one, it could explain the almost futuristic technology we see with the Funtime animatronics. When looking at Funtime Freddy's blueprints, he has the ability to voice Mimic and to lure, the same way the Mimic does. Did William Afton copy the Mimic's technology onto the Funtimes? He could keep learning from it, which was even the reason Fazbear's Entertainment were so desperate to get their hands on its schematics. If you really want to get crazy with possibilities or theories, the Mimic could be mimicking and replacing any human character we know of. In the Sister Location bunker, we saw human-like robot heads that were immediately connected to the crying child or Gregory being a robot. So using the same logic here, William could program the Mimic to mimic the crying child, Elizabeth, or even Michael Afton. Then he would just slap some flesh on them, and before you know it, they've been the Mimic this entire time. Taking it a step further, we can say the Mimic was Shadow Freddy in the FNAF 3 minigames. Simply because in FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy also mimics William Afton. In the minigames between each night, we see Shadow Freddy lure the 4 different animatronics into a room where William Afton dismantles them, the same way William Afton lured 5 children into a room and murdered them. William Afton is using Shadow Freddy to mimic his same actions, so what if Shadow Freddy was actually the Mimic or at least somehow connected to him? You may argue that Shadow Freddy is a hallucination and isn't real, as he's most like an agony or remnant manifestation. Well, what if Shadow Freddy is also a physical animatronic and not made of pure remnant? If he were a physical animatronic, that's why he looks like he's actually there, and that's why in FNAF 3 he seems real when the other animatronics follow him. They're not seeing some remnant illusion, but they're seeing a real animatronic leading them somewhere. And if he is real, how did William control an empty suit? Well, what if he didn't? What if it was the mimic under the Shadow Freddy suit? If William were to lure the animatronics on his own, we can assume it wouldn't work, since the animatronics only respond to other suits. But since he shoved the mimic into the Shadow Freddy suit, they would follow him and they would respond to him, as he would no longer just be an endoskeleton. And all of this would only be possible because he took control of the endoskeleton years earlier. However, I want to make it as clear as possible that this is just a thought to mess around with. So how does any of this fix the timeline? Well, I believe it tells us that William knew of Remnant since 1979 and that his experiments in the FNAF warehouse and the Sister Location bunker started around the same time. Probably around 1983 and still before the missing children incident. And finding these bodies inside mascot suits can also maybe tell us about his motivations. The MCI wasn't some crazy and evil event because one of his children died, but it was a cold and calculated event to learn more about Remnant. I know this is also theorized to be the motives behind the FNAF 3 minigames. William is returning to this pizzeria to dismantle these animatronics, extract the Remnant, and use it for his funtime animatronics. If this were to be the case, how did William know Remnant were in these animatronics and that it could be transferred to other animatronics? Well, now we can say he learned it from events in Secret of the Mimic. I also think having a clear idea of his motives can help us when deciding dates in the timeline. Because Remnant was something he knew of so early on, this could put events in the franchise earlier in the timeline, like with the MCI happening in 1983, and other deaths happening later in the timeline, like Charlie Emily dying in 1987. But these are just ideas because I know how controversial these topics can be. This could also tell us that the scooper from Sister Location was made around this time as well, and maybe even before the MCI. Based on the scooper blueprints, which actually stand for Scalable Creation of Ulterior Presence, we know it was designed as a remnant injector and as a remnant reservoir, which is most likely how William injected the remnant into the fun times if this is the case, and how Michael survived after being scooped. Instead of this being something that was created much later on in the timeline, it's always been there and could have maybe been used anywhere else we're not aware of. Of course, we can even tie this back to FNAF's infamous theory revolving around Circus Baby. With this theory, he brings up how the Immortal and the Relentless is a parallel to Edwin's story from the books, who had a mansion that was burnt in a fire. But now we can directly tie this to the events of Secret of the Mimic, where Edwin does exist as a character and his mansion is burnt in a fire, just like in the TV show. Then in Sister Location, we saw this chip being taken out of Circus Baby that Michael places on hand unit so Circus Baby can communicate with him. Now it's this small chip that is theorized to be the Mimic chip or a copy of his code. We then saw a similar chip being inserted into Helpy in FNAF Help Wanted 2, which would create a branch of the Mimic code, making Helpy the Mimic as well. A well-known theory already. In this same level, we find a drawing of Helpy escaping a burning building, a parallel to the chip escaping the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator fire. The chip just also happens to glow green like Glitch Trap. Circus Baby is described as being able to quote-unquote pretend, which could be referring to what the Mimic can do. And Baby is able to change voices when she takes on the form of Ennard. So taking in all this information with the context of what I just discussed, it would honestly make perfect sense. William was already in possession of the Mimic for years by this point, so he was the one who added the Mimic chip to Circus Baby, even giving her the ability to mimic voices. I also want to bring up that Dispatch from Secret of the Mimic and Hand Unit from Sister Location share the exact same voice. We know Dispatch turns out to be M1 or F10N4, so because it's the same voice as Hand Unit, this could be telling us that these Mimic chips can store different voices, as Hand Unit even gives us options to what voice we want to hear.
Using the keypad below, please select a new companion voice. For male, press 1. For female, press 2. For text only, press 3. For other options, press 4. It seems that you had some trouble with the keypad. I see what you were trying to type, and I will autocorrect it for you. Thank you for choosing Angsty Teen.
So, funny story. A dead body was found in this vent once. Okay, so not that funny, but it's a story.
It's even being theorized that these other voices like the Angsty Teen were a part of Team 12 that were first sent to retrieve the Mimic that I mentioned earlier, as the Mimic chip would copy these voices and store them to use later. So Hand Unit could directly be M1 or it's a branch of the Mimic code, but either way it feels that these similarities are intentional, and it also seems that FNAF was right all along. But again, all of this would only really be possible if the silhouette from Secret of the Mimic is indeed William. But there is also a big gap in the timeline where we have no idea what happened to the Mimic. We all know after William was spring-locked, he was trapped in this room for decades, so where was the Mimic for more than 30 years till we saw him again in Ruin? Well, I see two different options. One, the Mimic was being held in the bunker and escaped with the rest of the fun times when the time came, or you could take it as far to say that he was one of the fun times. But the option I believe in the most, which is something I kinda already discussed, is that the Mimic would return to his home or to Murray's costume manor. Whether that be that the Mimic just wandered off after William disappeared, or that he was always trying to return, the Mimic returning to MCM could set up his role in Ruin. It's well believed now that the Pizzaplex was built over MCM, so if the Mimic did return, he would be stationary for years until someone would find him around the time the Pizzaplex was being built. Then he roams around the Pizzaplex, murders people here and there before being trapped back in MCM by presumably Gregory and Vannesa. Now earlier I said I don't think it's Edwin, and that's still something I firmly believe in, because I don't think he would be stalking us. By this point Edwin already knows just how dangerous the Mimic really is after he was attacked by him, severely injuring his legs in the process.
I can't move. I can't feel my legs. Speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out. I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
So why wouldn't Edwin want to step in to try and save Arnold from the Mimic, or to try and even stop the Mimic himself? I honestly don't see the reason for Edwin to be back in MCM stalking us unless he would want to step in or stop the Mimic. Now I do still definitely think he's alive, especially since in the Tales novels he has a pretty significant role with the Pizzaplex. So I do think he's out there somewhere, and there's even a chance we'll see him in a future project. Future Bronze here one last time. Now there isn't much to add to this theory because most of it is based on what ifs and speculations, so instead I want to make some clarifications. If it felt like I was just throwing ideas at the end, that's cause I was. Ideas like the Mimic being Shadow Freddy don't have too much evidence, which is why I just included it at the end for something to think about. So I apologize if I felt like the ending was rushed, but there truthfully wasn't more to add to it. So please comment down below any thoughts and how I can continue to improve these videos. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video where we attempt to solve William Afton. Now so far I think we did a great job with the theory I'm the most proud in being Wokade. So what do you guys think? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories and if we really solved this infamous character. And don't forget to use code BRONZEFILMS when checking out any G Fuel products, and thank you all for the support. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you all so much for watching.